and 314 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Welcome back to Tactical Tangents. This is Mike. I'm sitting down with retired Lieutenant Will Huddler and retired Sergeant Ashton Pack from Las Vegas Metro PD. Will was the SWAT commander on the night of 1 October, the Mandalay Bay mass shooting in Las Vegas here, and had the responsibility of leading a whole team of guys, right, to tackle Mandalay Bay in search of the shooter, who was not yet completely accounted for. I think we'll hear kind of more of that story a little bit. And Ashton, you were a patrol supervisor the night of the shooting. So obviously you were on the front lines of this thing. You put together a debrief that you have. You're going to share some bits and pieces with us and talk through some of the insights and nuances of stuff. We'll pick your guys' brain about the attack. But before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about how this came to be. Will, you just recently retired several months ago.
Yes, I did. September of 21.
September, so not even a year ago, and took a position here at Brink Drones, who is one of our sponsors. We're proud to be partnered with you guys, and we appreciate your support. I just finished a 3-day course learning how to fly your drones. These are tactical drones. They can fly indoors. They can break windows. It's a cell phone. It can talk to people. And people have heard a lot about the spiel that I give, but I just came up for the 3-day course. A lot of great training, group of guys with experience, not just tech experience, and drone guys and these guys are impressive. Some of these, the piloting skills for these little racing drones that they brought out to do demos with, but not only guys with a tech background, but also legitimate tactical experience backgrounds.
That's right.
Team leaders and stuff that are part of this course to really help guys like me contextualize the use and the application of the drone, knowing that it's a tool, it's not the tool. It is something that you have to integrate into the big picture, right?
That's right.
So now you're working here as the VP of Public Safety Operations?
Yeah, I've been consulting with Brink since before I retired, and I came on full-time in that capacity. And yeah, certainly I oversee public safety operations, which is all of our training and all of the customer-facing operations, product demonstrations. And we've been, the team that you talked about, the trainers, we've been very blessed to recruit an amazing team with tons of experience, real world experience. And I think that speaks to what the mission of the company and where we're headed and how we were able to recruit those type folks because of where we're going.
There's a really cool story with Brink, and the heritage of the company is just fascinating. And it's just a great story. Can you talk about how you helped bring these drones into the tactical world and how it came to be for you guys?
Well, I mean, I appreciate, you trying to give me credit for that, but it wasn't me essentially that brought them into the tactical world. I just, I happen to answer my phone, right? And, I've always, I've had mentors that gave me that advice to have an open door policy to answer your phone when people call. And I'll get into that and how that, helped me with some of my decision making the night of our mass shooting here. But essentially, after that shooting, which was the first weekend that I had been handed the reins as the SWAT lieutenant, which is a tactical commander here in Las Vegas, that was my third day in charge of the team, and we got it handed to us. I mean, an agency that I feel, and I can say this after traveling, there's a lot of professional organizations around the world in terms of policing. I just don't know if anyone's doing it better than we're doing it here in Las Vegas. I know that a lot of agencies are there neck and neck, but to say that anyone's doing it better than the folks here in this city, I don't know that I can say that confidently. So, for us who, we stood up active shooter response program, MACTAC, we called it, right? It's called other things now in various parts of the country and the world. But we were proactive in that after the Mumbai attack went down, and we prided ourselves on being ready for the big day. And, you know, we were beat that night by an amateur, essentially, right? So that sort of sent us reeling internally. I realized I got a heavy dose of reality in terms of this is what you're in charge of. When things become overwhelming for the initial patrol response, when you show up, you better know what you're doing. You better be prepared. You need to be forward leaning. And in order to be forward leaning, you know, it implies that you're empowered to make decisions. You've handled your the expectations that your staff has of you, community has of you, that the team has of you. And I can tell you that after experiencing that, and we'll get into it, but, you know, it sort of ruined me in terms of balance, right? When 58 people, and now the number is 60, but when 58 that night are killed on your watch, you know, you never want that to happen again, right?
That's a lot to shoulder for sure.
Yeah, and then when you drive past Mandalay Bay every day to work, right? It's in your face. It never leaves, and you see the men and women that responded, and you run into people in the community that were victims. You know, there was an obsession to ensure it didn't happen again.
Yeah, and
so fast forward to a phone call. And when I talk about obsession, and the reason I'm saying that is because it's not because I'm trying to glorify my work ethic, because it was not healthy at all. What I'm trying to do is convey that to the other folks who are going to experience this as well.
Yeah.
And who already have.
It's inevitable.
And who already have. And it's, you know, it's the same realization that we have in police work that we're taught in the academy. You know, be hypervigilant. Don't ever let them catch you slipping. And then you lose a friend who was tactical. Mm-hmm. And you're like, how could that have happened? It's because we don't have as much control as we think we have.
Yeah. Enemy gets a vote.
Yeah, that's right. And at the end of the day, you know, we're in marked cars with lights on top, and we wear uniforms that are easily identified. I mean, I used to ride bikes on the strip. They called us bumblebees. I wore a yellow shirt. They saw us coming a mile away. Mm-hmm. Everyone can get the drop on us whenever they want. And that's this very sobering realization that hits. And that night it hit me, you know, and then I looked in the faces of the men and women as they came back from clearing the hotel. This is the reason I'm saying that it's an obsession, because it's unhealthy, and it's something I'm still dealing with today, quite frankly.
Definitely comes at a cost.
No doubt. And but what it did also was it sort of, we threw out the rule book in terms of how we can get better. We have this forgiveness over permission approach, whether it was okay or not. I took a phone call from a young man. He hadn't turned 18 yet when he called. And he says, introduced himself, said he'd like to build us a robot. And I thanked him for his call. But, you know, to put it in perspective, it's one of the busiest SWAT teams in America, right? I mean, 300 plus search warrants a year, and 50 to 60 barricades a year. And unfortunately, 8 to 12 hostage rescues a year, 1 or 2 active shooters a year, right? It's the top third percentile in terms of just volume. Yeah. It doesn't make them better. It just means I get a lot of volume, right? And so I did my best to kind of encourage him, but say, just too busy, buddy.
Yeah.
Right. And, you know, so my boss gets a call, because one thing Blake is, and the young man's name is Blake Resnick. He is persistent. Right. And my boss says, just go have coffee with the kid, Will. And I'm like, well, look, you know, you have and this was Chris Tomino, right? He was my captain at the time. He's an excellent leader. I said, well, you got the checkbook, boss, so you're coming. He's like, fine,
I'll do it, but you're coming too.
Yeah. So we met at the Einstein Bagel up on Westlake Mead. It was Blake and his dad. And I sat across from this kid, and he's larger than life with his hair, you know, and I was talking to him.
We'll show you guys a picture here in the video.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, when you work in public safety, you're used to people lying to you, right? And so he sort of gave us verbally his CV, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty impressive. Of course, I open web searched him in the parking lot as I'm walking to my car after we wrapped up. But I found out, from the ages of 14 to 17, he had worked with McLaren, DJI, and Tesla, and he said, he wanted to build us something, and he assumed strength. It wasn't like, I think I can. It was like, I can build you guys something that'll help you get down the hallway. And I said, well, there's a lot you need to know about that hallway and all the circumstances around that, because, you don't know what you don't know.
The whole thing. Yeah.
but let's give it a try. Let's give it a try, and fast forward to a couple of iterations of his hardware. He's built a drone, and Las Vegas Metro's SWAT team received the 2 drones after I had already left. But I stayed in touch with him during that formative process. And now, because it was designed by the members of the SWAT team here, it was designed by them and the surveillance team, which flies the drones. It was even named by the surveillance team, the lemur. It was really a solution to legitimate problems that Blake himself saw. He saw 2. He went out on nearly 24 call-outs on a ride-along waiver.
It's a heck of a ride-along.
Well, I mean, that's something we wouldn't have normally done.
Right.
We didn't lose 58 people in one night.
Fair enough.
Do you understand?
Yeah.
So it changed our frame of mind. But yeah, that's the genesis of the company. I stayed in touch with him. He says, listen, and this is all candid, man. He's like, he called me because I left SWAT and I was running the union, our supervisor's union, helping to run it. And he says, would you come out on these product demonstrations with us? Because they don't believe us that other SWAT teams are using this drone. Well, there's no footage, right? It's all flown inside. There's no proof that it's being done. And I says, absolutely not. I don't want to sell drones, Blake, but I will introduce you to friends that I met in the business, because everyone's in the tactical world. You have large sort of best practice bodies like the NTOA and other tactical officer associations, and we all train together. So I introduced him to folks. He went out on a couple more demos and they didn't go well because, we're a tough crowd.
Yeah.
Right. Extremely difficult. It would cut off our nose to spite our face, right? And
cops in general, but SWAT guys in particular.
Yeah. And so the third time he called, what if you just come and stand in the room while we're doing the product demonstration, and then when they inevitably ask, well, who else is using this, then you can chime in and say, look, I can vouch for this. This is my experience with it. And that's what I started consulting with and for them, and that relationship has continued. So now they're in a place where they can't build them fast enough.
Yeah. And we've gotten to tour the production facility here in Las Vegas where you guys are cranking these things out, and it's a lot because everything is built and assembled and it's all right here.
And what's cool, man, is like, I'm a fan of The Greatest Generation, and to walk into the shop back there and to see Americans building American technology for American public safety. And now they're going international, what we are. And it's just super exciting, and it connects me to previous generations. It's just a special feeling around here.
Yeah. It's going to be, it's going places, and we'll definitely touch on that as we wrap up. So I want to get a little bit to the shooting. Ashton, we haven't really gotten a chance to introduce you yet, other than patrol sergeant the night of. Obviously, can you tell us a little bit about your background? I know you recently retired. Yes. Around the same time frame.
Yeah, about a year ago.
Yeah. So what are you up to now, and what was your background like in law enforcement?
Well, now it's a very interesting job in retirement. I'm working for a nonprofit here in town called Hope for Prisoners. It's a prison reentry program. It's been partnered with Metro for about a decade in all reality, and I was one of the original cadre mentors that kind of go into men and women coming out of the custody status, out of prison, out of jails, who don't want to go back, really want to get their lives together. And so a very noble mission. I still get to kind of serve my fellow man in a way. probably a little bit more impactful in all reality in my post career, because I have this. I've always been a little bit of an out of the box thinker. I think maybe sometimes I wasn't even really meant to be a cop, and so I always realized, hey, we're never going to arrest our way out of these problems. I got sick and tired of taking the same people to jail over and over again because they were addicted to some substance. So getting out of prison and giving them $50 and a pat on the back isn't working. We put 1.2 million in prison every year. That's the big headline. What we don't ever talk about is the 600,000 we let out on the back end. And in all reality, they get out with a pat on the back and really no plan. They took some classes maybe inside to get out, but 98% of people who go to prison are going to get out. And so I always tell folks, left, right, whatever your politics are, whatever you think, what would you like them to have? If we put them through our program, we have a very high success rate. One study shows a 92% success rate, lowest recidivism rate in the entire country.
Wow.
So when I went to pull the plug about a year ago, and I can kind of echo what Will said about, 2017 was a big chink in the armor for, I think, both of us. Right after 1 October, my mom passed. It was the lead up to New Year's Eve. It was just a very stressful time for me. And it was one of those enlightening times, unfortunately, where it's like, okay, there's more to life than being obsessed with keeping Las Vegas, this little island in the Mojave, safe. So as I was leaving, my now boss, the founder of Hope, is a guy named John Ponder. He went to prison for bank robbery. He turned his whole life around. He's kind of a preacher. He's a pastor of a church. And he sat down with our now sheriff-elect, Kevin McMahill. He'll be the incoming sheriff here January 4th or 3rd or 4th when he takes the oath. And at the time, I think Kevin was just a Bolden captain. And, hey, they sat down over lunch and coffee, and John said, I have this vision. I want to bring cops to the table as part of the solution to help mentor men and women coming out of prison. And Kevin is an out-of-the-box, very progressive, forward-leaning law enforcement leader. And it was a no-brainer for him. Kevin, like me, learned early on, we're never going to arrest our way. I say we're never going to arrest our way out. We're never going to hug our way out. There's got to be a little bit of a balance there. And so the partnership between Las Vegas Metro Police and Hope for Prisoners was born. And when I retired, I kind of had been doing a lot of teaching around the country. My background is counter-terrorism, but it had always been near and dear to my heart when I had family members who had gone to prison, and that had followed them their whole life. They got out. They never, ever did anything illegal again. They raised their families. They lived very productive lives. But that record was always kind of in that background. It always had to go on that job application. And so I just believe in, so I'm a big believer in second chances. I know I was given a lot of chances. And I walked, I probably did some stupid things in my early 20s that I easily, if I, just got caught, I wouldn't be sitting here today having this conversation with you. I wouldn't have been at 1 October that night. So it's kind of one of those, there go I, but by the grace of God. And so I'm doing that now. But most of my career, I was, I did 23 years total, 20 with Metro. And most of my career was spent kind of in the shadow world of the counterterrorism. I was in the academy on 9/11 here in Vegas. And so that kind of resonated with me. And so a lot of my career was working in not only just counterterrorism, I was assigned to the FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force for about 3 years.
Very cool. I
was there as both a detective. I was one of the few unicorns that, goes as a detective and then comes back as a detective sergeant.
Yeah.
So, my passion when I was in CT was human intelligence. I found that, we had a source team that would just go out and make nice with people in the community who didn't look like us and were from different parts of the world, because Vegas is probably one of the most diverse, in true reality, the most diverse communities in America. And I think that's a great thing. But we had intelligence gaps, we had information gaps, and part of that terrorism model is, we can take out very, very bad targets in the Middle East. Like, I'm hoping this drone strike that killed Zawahiri, who in all reality ran Al-Qaeda. Bin Laden was just kind of the poster child, the money, the face of the organization, because he had that kind of that wasta in that community in the Middle East, because who his parents were. But, we can only do so much with drone strikes. We can only do so much to arrest our way out of that problem as well. And what we found here in Vegas is if we engage, if you have an engagement process on the uniform side, and then on the intelligence gathering side, kind of the secret squirrel stuff, having sources that can work and provide information, what we find is that the vast majority of people from different parts of the world, different religious beliefs, they don't mean any harm to, your fellow man. They are concerned too. They just don't know how to reach out sometimes.
Right.
And so my passion was human intelligence. I worked and ran the source development team, which we kind of rebranded when I went back as a sergeant as the Counter-terrorism intelligence. And so it was a myriad of undercover work and also having to now focus not on just international terrorism, but this ever expanding domestic terrorism that seems to go in these waves since I was a kid. And so now, the big threat now is, in all reality, I think a lot of time is spent trying to counter the domestic side, the craziness, the left and the right. And then threat assessment, because everyone has a phone now. Everyone's in instant contact, and we give the best technology to some of the worst people, and we get, blown away when they send an email to a CEO of a major strip casino. I'm going to come chop your head off, and we have to go follow that up. So threat assessment, emerging threats and trends. It's kind of a jack of all trades. Counterterrorism's kind of become that. We're not just at war with Al Qaeda forever. We can't continue to do that, especially in the civilian law enforcement world. And so it kind of has shifted a little bit to more domestic and threat assessment and stopping, peeling the onion back, having to go down the rabbit hole. And so for me, on the night of 1 October, I had promoted, and at Metro, like many other police departments, you promote and you kind of go back to patrol. You don't really ever promote in place. There's been a very select group of people, and I wasn't in that club. And so I went back, and I was ready to kind of step back into that patrol realm and lead young cops and have some fun again and be able to turn my computer off at night and go home and kind of decompress. And so I was a Bolden area command sergeant that night. And I got a call from dispatch and, shots fired, active shooter at the Route 91. And I'm like, well, we hear this all the time. Everything now is an active shooter. Anytime, something knocks over in a hotel lobby or the airport and everyone starts running and then Twitter shows it's an active shooter. And I thought, well, we hear this all the time. But my heart sank when I clicked the radio over and I could hear an actual, what sounded like automatic weapon fire. What we found out was that bump stock and cops screaming, officers down, citizens down. And so my heart sunk because for me, that night, my obsession, like Will's obsession, was don't let it happen. Don't let Mumbai happen here. And so we train for that MACTAC, that whole, the tactical side of things. But in all reality, let's not ever have to implement it. Let's just prevent it. And we do that through like intelligence-led policing. And so my heart sunk because, at the time, kind of the flavor of the day was this. I immediately thought Al Qaeda, ISIS, international terrorism attack. And my heart sunk that night because I thought, man, I failed in my mission because, we have, not to reveal sources and methods, but we have a lot of stuff out there trying to prevent tripwires. To catch these things, not just Metro, but working with FBI, DHS, sister organizations. Vegas isn't the only city, the county, the city, the Henderson, North Las Vegas. And so for me, it was like, what did we miss?
Yeah, that's got to be a compelling feeling, especially in the midst of also having to do something about it, right? In those moments, now you're thinking, all right, well, one is we've put all this time and effort into trying to avoid this outcome, and now we're here, and I couldn't imagine the chaos going through your head in terms of where do I need to be next. And in one conversation that I had with you before we sat down to record this, you had thought about that Mumbai style attack, right, where multiple places are getting hit with multiple shooters, and I know from this event there was like any active shooter event, there's always a report of another shooter. Mm-hmm. There's some statistics out there that suggest something like 1.5% of the time that is the case. Mm-hmm. 98.5% of the time, an active shooter or active killer is acting alone. Mm-hmm. But with the reports of this, I know that there were thoughts of a second shooter or a second attacker. And you had mentioned that you had your patrol guys set aside anticipating that. Can you talk us about some of that?
Sure. And we definitely got what I call echo reporting. Not only, someone runs into a casino, they're shooting and people go, there's an active shooter, and it kind of spreads like that telephone game. And
sure.
Plus you had people around the world using, again, technology to call 911 and scream shots fired this place. And so our dispatchers had to assume, as they do, hey, this is real. Let's treat it as something real, and hopefully it's not. And it all panned out. In the end, it all ended up being nothing. But in the initialities of what was happening, my thoughts went to a Mumbai style attack. Mm-hmm. And that attack was, I encourage people who are listening to go do a little research on that. That organization was Lashkar-e-Taiba, or LET. That was a terrorist organization, Pakistani backed. They had the Pakistani intelligence services helping them. They had a command center set up for the attack. It was a very, very coordinated. The BBC did an amazing documentary on it.
I'll find that.
Yeah, it was really, really horrific on how nation states can partner with these, splinter organizations to really wreak havoc in other countries and places around the world. But anyways, in that immediate, when it was happening, my thoughts were, this is a counterterrorism issue. This is this is going to be a terrorist attack. I'm going to treat this like an ISIS, Al-Qaeda coordinated attack. And I said it was one of the hardest decisions I ever made in my entire career, was to tell my young 5-year cop pit bulls, who many of them now are on the SWAT team, had made it there to that upper echelon, and to pull those chains and say, we're not running to Mandalay Bay. We're going to wait for a second. Let's give this 10 minutes, because when some true second cell starts shooting up Fremont Street, which is pretty far from Mandalay Bay, and all you have that resource over convergence, and we know in law enforcement, man, how come medical can't get in? Because 50 cop cars are parked in front of the scene,
the street. Yeah.
Blocking the street, and every car's locked and running, and now we got to pull cops back to their car. It's like, just, I've been doing this for so long. It's like, let's learn, when are we going to learn the lesson here? And because I really truly thought, maybe it's going to be Fremont Street, maybe it's going to be Red Rock Station up on the west edge of town, maybe it's going to be something else. And for about, it was one of the hardest decisions I ever made. And at the time, my cops were really mad at me. They were really, and you think now in Uvalde, we have this situation where there's an active assailant in a room showing homicidal intent, and they waited. And I'm thinking, and that kind of rehashed that wound for me. I was like, oh man, I'm sitting here as a best practice thinking, is there a time to actually tell your cops to wait versus, and I have to say to myself, look, you weren't at Mandalay Bay. You weren't in the wing. There's a difference. There's a nuance there to pulling the reins in.
Yeah. Versus you were 11 miles away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's big picture thinking too, to recognize the very real potential of something else kicking off. I mean, Las Vegas is a lucrative target.
Yes.
If it was one of these other organizations or something like that, that is very plausible. And quite frankly, and I don't say this to bag on anybody, but most patrol supervisors that I've ever interacted with aren't thinking at that level. They just don't have that background knowledge. And frankly, in a lot of ways, the strategic level of thinking to recognize that possibility. And so I don't know how many other people were thinking that way, but if you sent every single cop to Mandalay Bay, there's a real big problem there, not only for another attack, but also we know that many people like to do secondary attacks where those first responders are going to start to gather themselves. So I recognize that had to be difficult.
Yeah. It was just my background. I not a lot of people, I think it was just the moon, the sun, the stars all aligned that night, and a career counterterrorism detective had promoted and was all of a sudden in a position to use that training and experience that we rely on as law enforcement officers. And it's experience in our reality that, we train, but then it's when you have that real world experience. And, my 5-year cops hadn't read 10,000 classified documents on what the enemy wants to do in this country. I had.
Right.
And that's just a perspective when you get to go around the world and teach and talk and meet people and really peel onions back on terrorist organizations. And when it's just that you have to, it's like, who would have ever thought that 19 people would lead us into a 20-year war by hijacking airplanes and flying them in the buildings? No one ever thought, it just never really, it's that lack of imagination. And I tried to convince myself early on that you had to think like that wolf, you had to think like the enemy. There's that thin line I always say, it's like these barrel bodies popping up in Lake Mead. I thought years ago, man, you just dump a body in a barrel in Lake Mead. And lo and behold, great minds think alike, the mob is like, hey, this is never coming back. They never, ever thought, Lake Mead would be 25% full. And when it did hit that, all these people are long gone. Mm-hmm. So you have to think, as I always stress to law enforcement, get out of your comfort zone, Get out of the box.
That's right.
Think different. Be a ninja. Like we're ninjas. Like be a ninja.
Yeah.
And ninja doesn't necessarily just run, balls to the wall. Forgive my language, but sometimes, there's a time to rush in and then there's time to step back and kind of see what's going on.
Well, and you have to recognize that in that 11-mile space between where we are and where this is happening, how many other cops are in the middle of it?
We had cops in our area command who were ordered, the rules are, this team goes, this team stays home because we still have to provide police services to the area.
Right.
And there were cops on the squad clearly delineated, do not leave the area, driving 100 miles an hour down the freeway, complete amygdala hijack, tunnel vision and now they're gone. Now their supervisor has to deal with them no longer being in the area to provide the resources.
Now you have some slides that I know you go around and you give a talk on this, and you brought them to share with us a little bit. And it opens with a picture of you that night with a phone. Can you tell us a little bit about that? It's a pretty powerful image.
This is a picture taken by I had no idea it was even. I didn't even see the photographer who's a reporter for the AP or just a photographer who sells to news outlets. And that's me standing basically in the middle of Las Vegas Boulevard and Tropicana, probably one of the busiest intersections in the world. And it had been shut down and medical had kind of turned this into a hasty triage. You can see the orange tarp there was folks who could not be saved. They were deceased, unfortunately, had lost their lives. There's the body under the tarp. And so I'm on the phone at the time, my area command captain, a gentleman by the name of Robert Plummer, who ended up retiring, went on to be a chief of police in California, and he's now back in Las Vegas doing security work. But he had just, I was on the phone with him, and he had told me that one of our officers, Charleston Hartfield, had passed away as a result of the attack. And in that moment, I wasn't 100% sure that, I didn't know we had lost so many people. I thought we had, our initial reports were, 5, 6, 7 people were down. And Charleston, Charlie, as I knew him, was one of them. And so that was that intersection. After basically what happened was we finally did end up responding to the scene. I could tell that they needed more as those echo reports were coming in. I said, okay, let's get down there. I split my team into thirds and I took my most tactically proficient people. The other 2/3, I said, we have to protect our trauma center, the University Medical Center, Level 1 Trauma Center. And we have to protect our Metro Police Headquarters, as I knew everyone from executive staff, all the counter-terrorism cops, all the intel, everyone who's going to come and now start to do the investigation side would be responding to Metro Headquarters. So I sent a team over to UMC. We can't lose UMC. We lose UMC, we lose the Valley. And one of the things for listeners who are listening, part of the obsession that Will spoke about is Las Vegas is an island in the Mojave Desert. There's no one coming. Metro has to have this. There's no one coming. It's up to us mentality. If you're in Southern California and something crazy happens, LAPD, one of the largest police departments in the world, about 10,000 man department, LA County Sheriffs, the largest sheriff's department in the world. You have all these regional cities. You have military. You have San Diego, an hour and a half south, maybe an hour with lights and sirens. You have a lot of resources there. In Nevada, in Las Vegas, there is none. It's just, Metro has to kind of own that valley because North Las Vegas is understaffed. Henderson isn't going to, they can only send so many because their cities have to be policed as well.
Sure.
And so that's part of that, obsession, in my opinion, as to why, we do some of the things that we do as a police department. But I ended up becoming, I went and I responded, and we got to the command post, which was probably a little bit too close, but, in hindsight, it was just a command decision made in the moment, no big deal, not the end of the world. And the watch commander, we're standing there and a sergeant starts screaming on the radio, shots fired, Paris. And it's not a 911 call. It's not, hey, I'm getting reports. It's a uniform, not a uniform, but a Metro sergeant, and she is screaming, shots fired, Paris. And the watch commander, he makes me and my team strike team 13. And I'm like, oh, great. Lucky 13. Here we are in Vegas. 13's an unlucky number. But I'm like, hey, maybe it's a blessing in disguise. And so I remember driving down the strip from our South Central Area Command substation. And I had my one, I'm not driving. I'm in the passenger seat, kind of, the team leader. I told all my guys, I said, listen, If I go down, you're in charge. If you go down, you're in charge. If you go down, it's a bad night. Stay off your radios. Shut up. Calm is contagious. You know, all these people screaming on the radio, it doesn't help the event. So take that breath. That's the amygdala hijack that I would always tell. And my guys are like, Sarge, is this the amygdala hijack that you always talk about? I go, yes, this is the amygdala hijack when you hear people screaming on the radio versus, hey, I'm getting reports of shots fired. I'm going to need a team down here. Cool, calm, collected. And I know it's easier said than done. I remember driving down Las Vegas Boulevard, you know, in the passenger seat, getting to the Paris Hotel, anticipating, bad guys with AK-47s lighting our cars up.
You know, what's interesting is Ash and I probably grab lunch, I don't know, occasionally, I guess, every couple months, but I've never heard you talk about the event in this detail. And I think it's sort of indicative of what happens in public safety is, we sort of internalize all of this because, you knew things that I didn't know that night responding, and I knew things that you didn't know. Like, I never heard that, the number was 5. And so many, like the amygdala hijack, when cops show up, the ones that are trying to get there, and not everyone, you need folks that are willing to go, right? But when they go and they hear their peers screaming, because that's what you had first responders getting on the radio, calling out these echo calls. The fire department calls them distract calls. It wasn't people calling 911. There were people, when an officer says this is happening, we believe that.
Mm-hmm.
We believe that. And they all showed up to go find evil because, we talked about if you're not nearby, you might be best suited to wait for the secondary attack. But if you're close, you don't wait.
You got to go.
You stop the evil from occurring. And they showed up there to do that. And the numbers were rising. The body toll was rising. Body count was rising. And there was no one to punch in the face. And so what do they do with their hands? It's like apply pressure to that wound, put a tourniquet on, and then the other folks started grabbing their radios.
Yeah.
To kind of broadcast what they were seeing. And it was a situation where, like, we know you see that. We know it's really bad. We love you, but get off the radio.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's we've done an interview with a Marine helicopter pilot, call her MJ, the Marine. And we stole a quote from her, push to talk, not to think.
Mm-hmm.
The radio is push to talk, not to think. And that has always stuck with me. And I love the calm is contagious because it's tough when you interact with patrol officers who, like to your point, they mean really well and they're trying their best. I mean, they have whatever we've given them to that point, on the worst day of their career, worst day of their life, and they're doing their best with what they have. And so there's this weird, you have to think about what we can do different in training and preparation for the next one. And you also have to make sure that you have, guys like Ashton out there with them on the front lines to nudge them in the right direction, and Will, in your case, obviously your perspective being a little bit different in the position that you were in, which we could talk more about, but there's a leadership component to that really has like a big impact in getting people's head right.
Yeah. And what has to happen there is you need reps. Like, we can talk about it all we want,
right,
but you have to be confident and you have to be able to be secure in yourself to say, it's been said. It's been said. I don't need to call that out, because as baby officers, you're trained up. You better broadcast what you're seeing for situational awareness for everyone else that's showing up.
Right.
And you're crushed during your evaluations if you don't broadcast information. So they're conditioned to do that. And then that's sort of like the genesis or the evolution. And, we say leadership, but it's really a maturing,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And understanding, certain things need to be said. And there's times where it's just action.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, that's my thing is, I would say, hey, I'm not saying don't get on the radio, but dispatch isn't going to magically appear and save you if you're getting shot at.
Well, and to that point, dispatch can get overwhelmed too.
Yeah.
In that,
Oh, I'm sure.
well,
Yeah,
listen, you got the call the way you got the call. And can I get into this?
Yeah.
And the way that I got the call, I was barbecuing that night and I was, brand new, and I had some family over and they were like, so how was your first couple of days there? Right. Because they knew that I really loved being a police officer, and they knew that I loved that fog of war, like for the critical incident. They knew that, they would call me a magnet, to those type of incidents. And I know you've been called that before too.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, my first night as watch commander in Vegas, a guy stole an airplane and was circling the valley the night of the Mayweather Pacquiao fight.
Wow.
Right. And so it's like, my wife's like, there's no escaping it. It's just, these things are going to follow you. So they all wanted to know what was going on. And then we wrapped up and I headed upstairs and I got a text from my boss and he's like, hey, active shooter, Mandalay Bay, 15 down. And Chris can be a heck of a jokester, but not about work.
Mm-mm.
And I was like, okay, this is serious. And then I was getting ready to call dispatch, because that's my job, is to get intel and put out a brief and put out the communicator. And then my phone rang, and it was a sergeant in K9. And he was on the I-15. I could hear the distinct sound of his 5.4 liter V8 in his Expedition. Or maybe it was a Tahoe. I don't remember what he was driving. Anyway, but I heard all the cylinders cranking. And I heard, as we were talking on the phone, he says, hey, Will, this is real. This guy, ironically, is a captain now on the Strip.
Mm-hmm. I know exactly who you're talking about.
Yeah. And he says, Will, this is real. You need to get down here now. And as we were talking, I could hear the radio traffic, and I could hear when people are keying their mic, it sounded like our air unit was above them, that. And then I realized that's not the air unit. That's gunfire. Right. And I said, okay, we're rolling. And, I kind of asked him what he knew, and he conveyed what he knew at the time. It was just chaos. So I called dispatch, which is my job. And for the first time in my career, I was talking to a dispatcher who was speechless. I said, hey, this is Will, with SWAT. What do you got? And I heard the chaos at the supervisor's podium around her. I heard the buzz, and, our dispatch center is, 2 million calls a year, calls for service.
Mm-hmm.
That's calls for service that are created. That's not the number of calls they take.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
That's not cops screaming in the radio.
No.
Pursuit, vehicle pursuit.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I mean, you can probably nearly double that for volume. And, like almost pin drop silence. And I'm like, okay, be a leader. Like, that's the voice, it's going to be okay. We're coming. And, that we're coming is something that you long to say your entire career. Mm-hmm. You say it to yourself when you go to a hot call. You say it to yourself when you have a friend or family member in need, right? Yep. And I said, okay, we're coming. So I put out so I turned on the radio and tried to grab some from there. I put out what I had in a message. And then, the lesson for me was, as an incident, as a commander, I don't need to race to the epicenter. And we were taught that. I was taught that. As a matter of fact, in my lieutenant training, there was a lieutenant who spoke up to say, no, listen, when it's jumping off, I pull over and take my map out. And he was ostracized by the executive staffer that was in the class teaching the course. You need to be there. So I don't know if the tires on my Tahoe touched the ground on the 215. And as I was racing there, I put out a terrible communicator message. I hit the wrong button. I hit test. So a test message went out to everyone that was on the all call. That's all the SWAT teams in the Valley, to include FBI. That's all of our TAC medics, search and rescue, our armor team that runs the robots, our surveillance team. They all received a test communicator. And that test communicator prompted them to look at Twitter or to look at their text messages, that late into the evening on a Sunday evening. And oh my gosh, I gotta get down there. Right. So in spite of me, the SWAT team still responded.
Yeah. They figured it out.
Yeah. And it's interesting. And then, you said the hardest thing was to not go. For me, driving north on the boulevard, south of Mandalay Bay, seeing the chaos in front of me. And, I chose South Central Area Command, and I made a hard left, and making that left turn, because I hadn't been a lieutenant long, for a couple of years, and not running down range to grab some cops and say, let's go punch evil in the face.
Mm-hmm.
Like turning into the parking lot was like, I distinctly remember grabbing my steering wheel and like, yelling to myself in my truck. And I pulled into the parking lot. And, at that time, we say more than one. The reports that were coming in were three in light color camouflage. And come to find out later, because our comms were terrible, that those were two of our Overwatch, our snipers, that were in the hotel working their way up to the 32nd floor.
Yeah.
On their own initiative.
They're multicam. Yeah. And, but, we didn't, another takeaway for any leaders that are listening, or activists that are listening to this, is, all of your high rises should have repeaters. And we didn't have radio repeaters on our high rises. So our radio communications
were degraded
significantly.
And you have to anticipate that. I stress this. You must anticipate degraded communications in a mass casualty incident.
Well, in some of this, like you guys were talking about, people getting on the radio, you just don't even have the option. You can't transmit.
No.
Yeah. So Ashton,
and just to get back to this picture, by the time we had driven down to the Paris, figured out nothing was happening.
You do look good though, Ash.
Thank you. I was a little lighter there. I was a little bit more closer to my fighting weight. But by the time we get to Paris, figure out that, again, calm is contagious, and the sergeant was just, repeating what she had been told, not what she was seeing. We couldn't get back to the watch, to the command post, because they had blocked us off. And so we ended up staying here for a minute. And then we ended up inside the Tropicana Hotel, where we found out about probably a third of the concert had taken refuge and shelter. And in the entire, about 1,000 people, and in the entire room, there's like 2-3 North Las Vegas, which is a completely separate agency, different color uniforms. They work all the way on the other end of the valley, and they were the only cops in there. So my team ended up taking custody of that, kind of taking charge, because I knew we needed to start, 1,000 people in one small location will, could very quickly turn into a crazy event itself. And I knew at a, country western festival, everyone is drinking at a minimum.
Of course.
And this is day 3 of it. And so I wanted to get in there, make sure those folks were taken care of, try to identify any witnesses, and also make sure we didn't have any possible, secondary shooters in there. But it was right here where I saw a guy that I'd worked with on the FBI task force. He was an FBI agent. And I walked over to him. It was probably right around this time where this picture was taken. And I remember seeing him. His name was Joe. I said, Joe, is it Al-Qaeda, ISIS? And he looked at me, and he didn't recognize me at first, because I had all my, I had all the bat gear on. And he kind of like, oh, it's you. And he goes, no, it's some guy from Mesquite. And then I thought like Bundy Ranch, because we'd have the Bundy Ranch standoff here as well, where all these crazy militia folks had come out. We knew who our militia folks in Vegas and Southern Nevada were, but all of a sudden, 1,000 guys from all over the, Wyoming, Montana, Michigan are showing up with guns way bigger than ours. And so we had that incident. I thought, but the Bundys were kind of, country crowd would have been their people. Mm-hmm. So it was just so much cognitive dissonance happening in my head at this moment when that picture was taken.
And you've got some other slides. You want to walk us through some of these other things that you have to share with us?
This is this will really paint a picture if you play it. It's a little longer. You don't have to play the whole thing, but this is the dash cam from a Uber driver, and I think this is one of the entrances to Mandalay. And they got this, and you can really get a feel for the amount of firepower that bump stock and those weapons and what he had. If you want to,
and I'll warn you now, it's tough to listen to.
I always forget to remind myself that this is hard for me to see and hear.
Yeah, that's pretty compelling.
If you don't get to get it into this podcast, it's in one round there. The first couple shots are him shooting at the fuel tanks. He wanted to make the jet fuel tanks that are basically on the perimeter of the airport here in Las Vegas, not very far from where the crowd was. He wanted to spark those to have them explode.
We got a picture of that we can show you guys as well.
And so the first couple shots that you hear, kind of that select fire, was him shooting the tanks. That's a picture of it there. Like 100,000 gallons of fuel in that thing. They had to drain the whole thing to get the round out. And then after that, you hear about 110 shots in just one volley. That was one of the initial volleys where he's shooting into the crowd. There's no sound to this graphic. You can kind of play it. You get a feel for the situation of where you are, a little bit of situational awareness. You can see kind of in the lower left there, you see the airport, the runways of the airport. Mandalay Bay is the yellow point in the middle. And then it kind of shows you the effective range of fire for some of the 223 AR variant rifles that he had, and then the 308 bigger caliber rifles that he had in the other room, and in both rooms technically. Someone did this for us, and kind of gives you a graphic.
What's interesting is, when I pushed out South Central Area Command over the radio, over our SWAT channel. Excuse me. It was only because, my perception of all the carnage happening north of Russell Road, and only because the rest of the building was limiting his range of fire was South Central. The turnout being okay.
Yeah. But
it was well within range had he had a line of sight on us.
Yeah.
Right.
And again, that's one of those, you make a decision in the moment. This kind of brings you down and into where he was. And you can see where, he kind of had a really good line of sight there of the festival. There's the Tropicana Hotel in the foreground. That's where a lot of folks ended up. There's the fuel tanks. That's the executive terminal of McCarran Airport. And then where Will's talking about, where our command post was right over there, kind of in that foreground. And so the green is your AR variant, and the kind of that maroon burgundy is your 308 rounds of the effective range of fire. And this is obviously people had breached that airport perimeter and kind of hung out in some of the hangars there.
We got a picture of a bunch of people hanging out in the hangar too.
Yeah, that's a funny story. That's on the lighter side of my presentation. So several people had jumped the perimeter, and that's the very distinct tail mark. That paint scheme is any plane in Vegas painted like that belongs to the Venetian, Sheldon Adelson, who's since passed away. But those are all his planes. And anyways, they had taken kind of refuge in the airport area, jumping the perimeter fence, and one of the planes, I don't know which one exactly, but one of these really nice planes had for any bourbon fans out there, they had a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle, which is the unicorn of all bourbons.
Yeah.
And in true cowboy fashion, they polished it off.
Strange things you remember.
Yeah, the party continued. So I don't think the plane owner was too mad at him, So.
Yeah, under those circumstances, it's to be alive to tell about it's probably a reason to drink.
So in the Tactical Operations Center, the talk, right? As the intel was coming in, I've never seen this photo, right? But I imagined a mass of people because we had police officers at, formerly McCarran Airport, now Harry Reid, saying that there was an active shooter at McCarran Airport, right? So right when that report came in is when I prayed. And I was like, okay, what? Like, this is crazy. And, I always viewed the SWAT lieutenant when I was a young police officer working graveyard. I was sitting on a perimeter one time, and the SWAT lieutenant showed up, and he was larger than life, a really deep voice. And he put his hand on my back, and he said, "Thanks for being out here, son." And I always viewed that job as as being larger than life.
Yep.
And in that moment, I was like, I'm not that guy, and I looked around honestly, and I had a really good captain who was sitting in the negotiator's room that was in our talk. So he didn't flee, but it's interesting that when things are that bad, it really is up to you at the first line level, the troop level, the first line level, the middle manager level, the lieutenant, to grab the bull by the horns and take ownership. No one's coming, no one of rank, and it's not their job.
Yeah.
It's not the sheriff's job to come in there
Absolutely
and say,
not.
"Will, do this, this, and this."
Yes.
It's not their job. And, that's sort of the resolve that I felt. And not long after that is when my phone rang. But when the airport thing occurred, I had my backup lieutenant. She was sitting next to me. I said, "Okay, listen, you're going to take this channel and I'm going to manage this channel." And I also recalled something that an old sergeant told me, Eric Ficker. He's a retired sergeant. He was in the Marine Corps.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, "Will, how do you eat an elephant?"
One bite at a time.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that was it. So it's like, we have to use the intel, because it became this quest to identify false positives.
Yes.
Right. What's real, what's not. And we have to go off the intel that we have. And so I have to take that call seriously, but there's only so much I can do.
Right.
So after that happened, then my phone rang, and it was a detective. He's a sergeant now. His name's Matt Donaldson, and he's ranking in the Army as well. He's a stud.
Yep.
And I saw my phone ringing, and obviously it was chaos, because at the time I was having to communicate to the team leaders that were working their way through the Mandalay Bay via cell phone, because radio was in and out. And there's some, there is actually body cam footage of a SWAT operator near the elevator bank running in and out of the hotel to talk to me and relay it back to his sergeant. Like we were World War I communications.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we were holding the elevator bank because we were told that there were two shooters in white camo coming down the elevators. Well, those were two of our guys. Right. And they weren't coming down. They were in the elevator bank on the 32nd floor, covering down on the door that looked like Swiss cheese. And they were trying to get that to us. They couldn't communicate that to us at all. But that was not the only, it was one of the problems. But there was another report of hostages being held at a nightclub.
Yep. I remember that one.
There was a vehicle, a V-bid in the valet of the Luxor.
It was a smart car.
Of course there were.
It was a concept smart car with perimeter wire, and someone sleeping in the back seat. An officer called that out. So we were handling that. We handled there was an active shooter at the Paris, active shooter at the Tropicana. And so Matt calls and I hit hang up. And in my gut, I was like, damn it, I hate not answering when people call, because, I've been doing that my whole career. I've been the guy who never says no. And then also in the job as a SWAT lieutenant, you screen all the calls. So you have to answer your phone if you're in town. You have to. And it was like, if I ever had to hang up on my wife, the moment I hit the hang up, the red button, she's calling me again.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, oh, she's pissed, right? So I hit that button, and as soon as I hit it, Matt's calling me again. So I pop it under my headset. I'm like, "What's up, dude? Like, make this quick." And he's whispering, and he's like, he's with one of the other SWAT operators, with a SWAT operator named Levi at the time. And he says, "I'm with Levi. There's this many of us. We're on this floor. This is what we see. We found it." And then, what you talked about earlier about, not having everyone go, and we saw it at the Olympics in Atlanta, right? The secondary devices and all those type of things.
Yeah.
Not have everyone go and show up and wait to get in, and then things are blowing up and you're losing your responders.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, this is the first real intelligence we have, where someone is seeing it in terms of finding our evil, right? The source of the evil.
And it's a trusted source.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say that's,
I know him, and
Sure.
when he calls it,
Yeah.
you're like, yep. Okay.
But I'm going to tell you, in that moment, it helped that it was Matt.
Yeah.
But if it was any person in public safety that had the balls to call and say, "This is it," I would hold on to it for life, because we didn't have anything.
Right.
And in that between time, it's 18 now, Will. It's 22 now. It's 26, 31. I remember the numbers like it was yesterday.
Yep.
You know, I remember it. And, you know,
Yeah, I remember towards the end, they're like, I thought in the teens, and then someone said, no, they're like 40 something. I'm like, it took my breath away.
I mean, the whole thing was bad, but in terms of intel, we come from nothing because nothing was organized. I mean, we didn't know. As a matter of fact, the detective, Steve Bolanek, I think he's a sergeant now. Mm-hmm. Steve is. When he jumped on his radio and he said North Tower 2/3 of the way up.
Yep. He saw it very early.
But he said it on Northeast.
He couldn't get out on the radio channel.
Well, he said it on another radio channel. So the SWAT guys that were in the tower were leaving the range, which is in that area, and they heard that. So they went there and they tried to convey that to us and they couldn't.
Right.
Right. So this is at this time, we just had one of our patrol ships landing because I put 2 snipers in a helicopter. You know, trying to get eyes on the rooftop of the Mandalay Bay, because I was thinking the rooftop of the Mandalay Bay, right? Perfect. You can see down into that's what we were thinking. And one of the team leaders, Jesse Wiggins, took a group up there. And so then the decision was, okay. So then Matt hands the phone to Levi and I'm like, what do you got? And he's like, God damn it, I've been trying to get a hold of you. And I said, dude, the comms are down. Just talk to me. Right. So he briefs me on what he sees. And essentially, he's standing at this service door that goes to the stairwell, and across from him is a suite, is a door to a suite that is connected to his left to the larger suite. And I'll get into that in a second. So he said, "This is what I see." And then he says, and there's a cart that's out in front of me, and it's wired. Now, I just sent another team leader down to go check out with armor to go check out this V-bid. And I'm thinking this cart's going to go as soon as I step out in that hallway. Because right now there's no gunshots. This guy's waiting to ambush us. There's no gunfire right now, right? Even though there's no gunfire from the Mandalay Bay, the death toll was rising, and I didn't know why. I didn't stop and say, where are you getting these numbers from? Because I was focused on this. And one of my mentors, a former SWAT lieutenant and former undersheriff here, Rajette, he was like, Will, you need to push aside all that other stuff and focus on your team's response, focus on making evidence-based decisions, right? And the negotiators were working hard. They actually grabbed CT folks, because negotiators are essentially emergency investigators. You know this. Right. And they grabbed CT and they were working together. We had never done that before, right? But we were so unilateral in our SWAT command that patrol command knew things that we didn't know, and vice versa. And after this, another lesson learned, other takeaways is you're not too cool to set up next to patrol, for Pete's sake. And if it's necessitated because of the circumstances of the incident, fine, but have a liaison. Grab the watch commander and have them come in the tactical ops with you, because you need that comms. I mean, you know, I'll get into that more, but the situation there in the hallway was that cart's going to go, and Levi said it the same time I said it, and I said, but I need you to go, Levi. And Levi says, we got to go, right? There was a report that said we treated it like a barricade. And it's not that someone was trying to mislead anyone from the agency. It's just they didn't know. Yeah. It was never treated like a barricade. Even though there was no gunfire coming from the hotel room, in my mind, the body count was continuing to rise. There were all these other incidents. We weren't going to wait and treat this like a barricade. We were going to get in there. We were going to encounter evil and go on to the next one, right? So, and then the decision was this. I know I have a team in the foundation room at the very top of Mandalay Bay. I know I have guys working their way up the stairwell, because our plan, which was always the plan, which was we would show up to a bad day and someone from the hotel is going to have a go bag and they're going to hand it to us. But when you hear what you heard, people make business decisions. Mm-hmm. They're like, I'm not sticking around here because you said you were in the Michael Jackson Theater. I heard that there were shots fired in the Michael Jackson Theater, and I sent a team of SWAT folks to that theater as well. So it was all just this chaos. And my decision was, okay, am I going to lose half the SWAT team when this cart blows up? Or am I willing just to lose 2 to 3 SWAT operators and a handful of patrol officers when the cart blows up?
Yeah. So let's let that sink in for just 1 second. Cause like, as far as it's going no matter like these guys are putting out the pasture no matter what. Right. And so you're trying to find the degree of acceptable losses. I mean, how do you even...
How many civilian law enforcement leaders have had to face that decision in the history of...
I mean, how did you even approach that? I mean, had you ever thought about that before?
I'd given, I'd given orders before, I talked about the airplane hijack, the airplane theft, and the guy circling. And when he landed that plane, because the plan was he was going to pick somebody up anyway. I don't want to get too much into the details, but I gave those cops direction to pit the airplane because he wasn't going to hold the city hostage again for another 2 hours, right? And there's other times where I'd given officers like framework to say, hey, we're not going to allow this to happen. But the reason why there wasn't I didn't need to stop and take a beat is because the number that kept coming to my right ear from Chris.
It was just clear.
Yeah, so it was Captain Chris Tamano at the time and Captain Pete Buffelli at the time. They were here, and they had both sat in the chair that I was in.
Mm-hmm. Great leaders.
And they were like, "This is the number now," and there was no waiting, and that's why I needed hearing it from Levi helped. This is the first time I've been able to say it like this without breaking down in tears. Quite frankly,
I didn't know this.
Yeah, and the way that it worked out is. So I approved the crisis entry essentially for them, but we were still gonna incrementally try to incite the ambush before the crisis entry, which essentially was a lock on a hotel door and that whole setup is very robust, and when you have that many, they said it looked like Swiss cheese, right? So you have that many bullet exits in a door, you're not going to stand in front of the door with a crowbar,
right?
So we used energetic breaching to remove that door. But before they did that, they stepped in and they disturbed the carts in a way that would get us some intel on the cart. And it turned out that it was cameras, right? So then I breathed a sigh of relief.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's like, okay, once they're in the hallway long enough, this dude is just waiting to open up on them, just waiting, right? So they breached the door. Gave the approval. What I didn't know is guys were racing up the stairs to try to get there, and they were in full kit. And some of them had already humped from South Central Area Command 3/4 of a mile to the Mandalay Bay in full kit because we didn't know where evil was coming from. And the response of vehicles was drawing gunfire. We had already had an officer shot.
Mm-hmm. In the neck.
Yeah. Brady was shot.
I think it was his first day on the job.
I think he was day 3, 2 in field training, which there's another nuance there too, is his field training officer. I was fortunate enough to be at the academy staff for a bit. His training officer is a guy named Josh Haynes. And Josh was actually a UFC fighter. And I like to, I enjoy MMA, even though I can't now, but, when I locked horns with Josh Haynes in the academy, I realized, okay, there's a difference between a fighter and a dad. You know what I mean? Right. Just in the level of training and violence and strength. Anyway, well, Josh grabs Brady after he's hit, right? And he throws him in the car and he's driving him to the hospital. Well, Brady's on the mic. And for a moment there, people got to hear Josh calming Brady down. Like, hey, it's going to be okay. He was saying these things, and
calm is contagious.
But it was therapeutic for a lot of folks that were responding.
Yeah.
That heard that. So,
I have to interject really quick because you spoke here about a lot of your leadership decisions that night. And this is, this Uvalde incident is still fresh in my mind. And I really wanted to give a lot of those cops the benefit of the doubt because, so many people, it's so easy to critique something that you're never a part of. And you said this comment about where it's your job. It's not, you can't wait for the sheriff to show up. That's not his job. It's not executive staff's job to run scenes. And in Uvalde, it seems like we had this executive show up who shouldn't have been on the scene doing tactical incident command.
Well,
and what my point of it is
Sure.
this. And again, I haven't read, the after action report. We'll divvy it out and point the blame where it needs to go. But when lives are at stake and you're hearing the body count increase, this is where I could talk about maverick leadership. Your policy manual isn't a suicide pact. You had to make decisions in the moment to go, like, pit the plane. That's not in our policy manual. I'm pretty sure that
There's not a playbook for
there's
that.
not a playbook for 58 people getting killed at a country music festival, and so I'm a big proponent of this. There's beg forgiveness, ask, I'm not going to ask you permission. Now, I'm not saying be reckless. I'm not saying we break rules, but when people are dying, you have to have a maverick who can stand up. And I don't care if it's just a cop, who says, like this border patrol agent who said, no, we're not waiting anymore.
Yeah.
We're putting boots on ground and we're going to go kill this evil. Because that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with evil. And every cop in America, I hope, hears it, because every police officer in America is a leader. Whether you like it or not, whether you want to be or not, when people are dying, you need to be the leader. And if you need to break a rule when people are dying, don't worry about it. I'd like to think we got your back.
Moral courage.
Yeah, moral courage.
You got to have the moral courage to do the right thing.
And I'll tell you straight up, we had an incident here where an officer was killed, and a supervisor on scene, we won't use names, said we're waiting for SWAT. And a police officer on that same exact team, taking rounds behind a car, seeking cover, turned to the sergeant and said, no, we're not. I'm going right now. And we didn't jam him up for insubordination or failure to follow an order. And they went up and tried to save a police officer's life who had unfortunately died. So you have to have this maverick leadership in policing.
Yeah. And to that point, everyone, we all have our perceptive base, right? So, I was a young cop when that happened, and I know.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, and the guy that did that, and actually the other guy that was involved in that shooting was now on my team.
Yes.
And he, you talk about putting the community first. His kids were at the concert, right? He drives past the concert to go to the tower, right? As a SWAT cop. And we have a lot of folks do that. So, but my perceptive base was this, we had terrorism here. Ash and I lost a very good friend to terrorism here. And then we had a gunfight subsequent to that in a Walmart, and cops had to go in and handle this. Otherwise, more people were going to be killed. It's like, how long are you going to let someone stand in front of you with a balled up fist and threatening to punch you? You have to take action so that it doesn't get out of hand any more than it already is, right?
Yeah.
So those decisions, looking back, they don't feel remarkable to me, because it was so obvious. It was so obvious what had to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also obvious, like the business decision of, okay, they'll never forgive me, but I can't have the whole team. I can't have them wait for the whole team.
Mm-mm.
We don't have time. And let me tell you, that the debrief a few days later, standing in front of all of them, they probably still don't. You talk about how your cops are upset that you made them wait.
Yeah. I made my cops wait, and I made them call their loved ones, because a lot of them weren't married. Like, oh, you're not married yet? We'll call your dad. Tell him you love. Like, one of my cops' dad is the former undersheriff, and they were so mad at me. And weeks later, many of them, almost all of them, came to me and said, I was so angry that you made me wait, and you made me call my girlfriend or my dad to tell him I love him. But I'm glad you did it. I said, I did it because I want you to realize that life is precious. And we might not make it back tonight.
That's right.
You don't get to pick the day.
Yeah. And I want you to think. I want you to use that brain. We hired you because you're a thinker. Reader, writer, thinker, fighter. Use the brain. Don't let the emotions take hold. And I want you to realize your mortality. Call your parents, tell them you love them. One of the hardest things I ever did as a sergeant.
Sure.
Left a mark, though, it sounds like.
I hope.
for those guys. That's good.
I always say I came up on the shoulders of giants. I like to think I hope I filled those, will to fill those shoes.
Yeah, I think that's a important message to hear. Making sure that you take time to reach out to your loved ones when you can. I mean, I'm glad that they had that opportunity, because we know that minutes later they would look like the officer that we see in this video that you've shared with us, some body worn camera footage. Can you break this down for us a little bit, and then we'll play it for everyone?
Sure. This is body cam footage from a very good friend of mine, Monique Bulmer. She's a sergeant, soon to be a lieutenant, if not already. And she was one of the sister squads that I worked with in our area command, but this was her night off, and she was just working an overtime shift. And, during overtime, I think executives just make a decision of, we want like these super bright traffic vests. That became a target that night. But, what are the odds getting hit by a car drunk versus, some
targeted attack? Yeah.
Targeted attack we didn't anticipate. So, but anyways, it's just a great example of the second shots are fired. She's running through the area, trying to help, trying to do something, and people are running away, cops run into gunfire. It's just, it really shows, in my opinion, I was really upset after 2020 when I saw a lot of cities burning because of the actions of one police officer. And we had our fair share of protests here in Las Vegas, and kids all mad at us just in general, which, I kind of understand. But at the same time, I said no one was protesting us on October 2nd that morning. No one was throwing rocks at us. This is just a testament to public service and putting your fellow man ahead of you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And they cut it there. She keeps running. There's basically rounds raining down around her. He was shooting at her. And she's a mom, she's mom, got kids at home, got a husband, and very brave young lady.
And these are the people that we've got to equip, and train and prepare. And that doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's people like her who are going to run into that head first with whatever they got, and I just think that our society and the communities that we live and we work in need to wrap their heads around making them successful. Like, making people like her successful in their jobs is something that has consequences, right? And Will, you spoke to this earlier, like, we have to get this right. This is what we do. Like, public safety is our thing. That's our jam. And we go to the sound of the gunfire, right? We fight the evil. We stop the killing, stop the dying. That's what this is about. And there's a whole lot that goes into making people ready for that. And it's a leadership thing, and it's a training thing, and it's a funding thing, and it's taking care of each other. There's a whole lot of that, which we can get into some of the aftermath and the aftercare type stuff in a minute. I do want to talk about this scene. Also sort of prompts a first glimpse of what the chaos looked like there at the scene, where bodies are laying everywhere, and you had to deal with not only this active killer situation, but also deal with the casualties and the body count that we've been speaking to. We've learned a lot over the years about rescue task force and integrating police and fire personnel in a way that they can get into warm zone environments. Can you speak to any lessons or insights that you guys have as it relates to this?
Yeah, I'll start off, and this is not being downrange, being at the command post. I didn't get to see some of the interaction, but I will tell you that, in the sort of the fog of war, as we're trying to figure out what was going on, there was a lot of officers and sergeants just taking action. Here's the other thing too, is Ash said that Sergeant Bowmer was working that overtime. It was the third year. This is the event that everyone wanted to work. So, the first week of October is usually the best weather of the year in Las Vegas.
Magic.
I mean, it's, my wife and I were married October 5th for that reason.
Yeah.
And everyone wants this overtime assignment. There are often, because of the type of music and the type of folks that show up to this, to that event, it's like there are probably more guns in the parking lot, in the back of the window, or rifles or whatever, than the cops are showing up with, quite frankly. And it's also what led to a lot of people taking action. This is a type of event where folks are trying to buy you food. They're trying to make conversation with you. They're thanking you for what you do.
They're trying to buy you beer.
And you feel good, it makes you feel good about, okay, it's nice to hear, hey, thanks. And, it's hard to also accept that compliment because you're torn. It's like this thing where you're made to feel bad about your calling because you don't see Monique. That's not her job. That's not a job. I used to deliver papers. I used to pick trenches. Those are jobs. You don't run towards evil like that unless you're called to do it. Knowing she has a family at home. And there are a lot of folks that night that were already doing it. We label it Rescue Task Force. But really it's like grabbing some folks who, and in an incident like that, it's multidisciplinary anyway. And like, Ash said, he grabbed some of his folks that were, the more tactically sound folks. And, that's essentially what the idea behind that is just a way to sort of organize that and take it from being chaotic just to complex. We can handle complex, right? And that Rescue Task Force started off, is sort of a spinoff of MacTac. And ironically, our buddy that was killed, Alan Beck and Igor Soldo, they were both killed. But Alan was was part of that first group to teach the agency about MacTac, and that went worldwide. Essentially that model of response. And the fact that we were all doing it then, and and knowing that he had a hand in training us was also pretty surreal, right? But when I hear our training director now, Kevin, you spent some time with him this week. When you hear him give his account of, so after we entered that hotel room, after the team entered the hotel room, the energetic breach from the door made the interior door connecting to the other suite slam shut. So what are you thinking?
Someone's in the room.
Someone's in the room. And when you
there's also a broken window. The draft helped.
There you go. Yeah. So it slammed shut. They heard the slam. Like, okay, someone fled to that room. They clean up the room. They see what they see. Once they're in there, now my phone is blowing up from the executives wanting to know what they see, right? And they work their way to the other room. They put a charge. They put a charge on that door. Energetic breach that door too. Cleaned that up. We realized, holy cow, there's just one guy. All right, let's go find the others now. That was the mindset.
Yeah.
Let's go find the others. And then I had heard that we were missing Charlie. So one of my negotiators worked in a problem-solving unit with Charlie, and I worked in a problem-solving unit where Charlie had trained my whole squad how to do contact buys. And that dude, you could put him in any environment and he could drum up business, and he taught us all how to do it. And he was the best. And I loved him, and his boy played football with my nephew, and I'd heard that name, but I heard that he was missing. And again, we were unilateral. So for takeaways, please connect your tactical operations to your patrol CP, and don't be too cool to be near them. And you don't want them to hear and see what's going on. Damn all that stuff.
That's a really good point, because the whole shift in doctrine for active killer stuff post Columbine, was this is not a SWAT problem, it's a patrol problem kind of thing. And so you see guys now that are running active killer programs there's always some background, tactical background that they bring to bear when they teach that stuff, like often places, right? Many places. But taking that a step further, past rescue task force and even to these tactical operations is bringing everyone closer together and understanding that the lines they cannot be that distinct.
No.
And we've had some incidents, obviously not to this scale, but to this scale, but where I work, we've had incidents where, hey, with the manpower that we have right now, like we're going to have to tie in our regional team, or we're going to have to augment ourselves with patrol somehow, or augment with canine more, or like we don't have the bodies for this, just the manpower.
Yeah, we don't on tactical side. And so I'll paint this picture for you. So once I found out, okay, that room is essentially clear now, aside from the evidence, right? And then we followed up on another room on the 4th floor. I don't know if anyone knew about that, because he also tried to get a room on the 4th floor, and we got intel there. We followed up on that, and then it was like, okay, we don't know where Charlie was. Well, patrol knew where Charlie was, and also the decision was, am I going to give the hotel back to the management now? Do I feel safe turning it over to them when the number was still increasing? But I didn't know that number was coming from hospitals. It was coming from the scene. It was coming from all over, right? And the answer was no. I'm not going to give this hotel back to them until I know there's no other evil in that hotel. So I was like, I got to get my team leaders on the horn here. And something that happened in between now and then was there was a team leader. He's retired now. He's a great tactician. He worked in homicide before he went to SWAT. And I actually sent him downrange with armor to go check out on that V-bid. And he was running that element. And, because he's an investigator, he was at the Tropicana, and this guy comes running up to him asking for help. And the guy's, both of his glutes are shot off, like gone. And he's like, where were you shot? And the guy's like, right here. And he goes, no, dude. Where were you when you were shot? He goes, we're all coming from the concert. And that's the first, and then he relayed that to us. And that's the first time I was like, maybe all of these things aren't actually happening. Maybe these are these folks fleeing. So that's what folks need to know.
Yeah.
Is that when you have that incident, and in the, in the graphic that you have, it radiates from the epicenter, victims flee. When you have Americans, and it's just within our culture, you talk to anyone, you travel, like no one gets into it the way we do, man.
Yeah.
This is why we kick everybody's butts. Like, we work hard, we grind, we want to help people, we want to lend a hand.
Especially the Heartland folks.
And the folks that were at that concert, it's like, I'm commandeering a car,
Yep.
I'm taking a handful of you, and we're going to the hospital.
Yeah.
I mean, commandeering police cars.
Yeah.
Putting their belt underneath the fence with, I can't imagine the size of belt buckle it took, and to yank that fence up so people can crawl underneath that and run across the tarmac at McCarran.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So all of those people are going wherever they can go.
How many citizens just turned into first responders that night is an absolute testament to the heart of America.
That's right.
To who we are.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
And just really quick, before I forget about Rescue Task Force, I just, I think it's such a critical component, and it was one of those things that we had worked really hard to implement here in Vegas, and not necessarily anything I had ever worked in, but I love the concept, and I'm glad we had it. I think for police across the country and fire and medical, you have to remember you'll have your policies, and then you'll have your culture. And culture always kind of eats policy for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so I really stress, Rescue Task Force looks good on paper, but if your cops and your medical guys aren't going out and having a beer and breaking bread and getting to know each other, so that those medical guys know, okay, it's a warm zone and these cops can handle business if it becomes hot again. Yeah. That's a big, big deal that, especially for executives, like, let those guys go out, pay for their lunch, bring the taco truck over, whatever you got to do to build that, build that relationship.
And Ash, to that point on the RTF. So fast forward to, I search in my phone. I've got to tell these guys, we're going to clear this entire property. And I look, and there's 3,211 hotel rooms in Mandalay Bay. And I'm like, okay, I have 35 operators downrange, right? So I call I get the team leader that's down there. I go, we need to clear this entire hotel. And
I don't know if most people, I'm sure there's people listening that understand, but there are a lot of people probably not in law enforcement that might listen to this and not understand how big of a task that is.
Yeah, listen, I mean, it was, when I saw the number, it was headset off, like rubbing my head.
That's eating 10 elephants one bite at a time.
Yeah, and so my direction was, look, you need to grab bodies, multidisciplinary teams. We need to grab medical. We'll RTF up and we'll get this thing done. And there was some hesitation there from the team leader. And so his assistant team leader, who now works for us, who is the training director, says, Sarge, we need help. And the Sarge says, okay, let's do it. So Kevin looks to the mass of police officers, because again, unilateral. The SWAT folks were here. The patrol officers were here, right? And the patrol officer's like, well, that's a SWAT team.
Mm-hmm.
Kevin looks at them and he does the home run signal, like rally up, and a sea of uniformed police officers come sprinting towards him. What do you need? How can we help? And so it was like, okay, started divvying them up, letting me know who was with what team, because we're still running ICS. It's still taking your PAR, your personal accountability reports, and who's with who's in charge. If this person goes down, who's taking it, who's the medical. And so at that time, the culture was Clark County, fire. Las Vegas City, fire. North Las Vegas, fire. We had private folks get in the mix. Halfway through, we had a municipality pool their fire from our RTF.
Yes.
And what I was told was, we're not trained for this.
Who is?
We're not doing this.
Yeah.
This is not our job, right? To creep through hallways behind us, a stack of folks with rifles out and handguns out, and check doors and make sure that there's no other evil, right? And then there was a whole process of parsing, okay, which doors are we going to kick? Which doors are we going to force open, right? And it was really just look for prima facie at that point. And so, any evidence that would suggest we need to pay attention to this room, I try to make contact with the person in every single room so we could say that we tried, right? But to the point about the culture, we had set the culture with most of our partners in the Valley, except for one, and they weren't ready. I was fuming.
Mm-hmm.
Because this was it. This wasn't our Super Bowl, man. This was our one night. Like when I was a baby cop, we had Katrina and a group of Metro folks got to go down there, and I was like, man, I could have went down there and helped.
Mm-hmm.
And this was our night to act.
How about 9/11 when we sent cops to 9/11 and we had Metro cops out there at ground zero?
That's right. Like it's all hands on deck.
Yeah.
No one cares about your rank or your job.
Yep.
Let's get it done. Right. So, but that RTF concept, they came together, multidisciplinary, they divvied up responsibilities, and everyone was focused on life safety. That's it. The goal is life safety. And, that is a concept that works. Absolutely. But it doesn't unless you break bread, unless you train, because the heads can talk about it,
yep,
but the body's got to get together. They have to. And
there has to be implicit trust built between those groups. And it's funny you mentioned the citizens and just the party goers that are now getting in the mix and helping out. And there's one of our trauma director where I live has been on the show before, Dr. Andrew Tang, and he does some talks, and he talks about trauma as a system. As a trauma medical director, he runs the trauma surgery unit. And, it starts with the people on scene. They're the first responders, like you guys are saying. And so the system, it's all the community outreach. It's all the, those relationships, and the same thing happens here, like you're saying, get people at the concert are trying to buy food for the officers that are working it and stuff like that. I mean, it's a big picture thing. And so we have to figure out how to employ that help to solve problems like this, because no one is trained for that, right? We talk a good game about active killer training. No one is trained for 1 October.
Well, there's no level of training that prepares you for this.
No, it's personal, right? So Monique mentally had already made that rep.
Yeah.
She had decided when she hired on, because that's the test, right? Will you run toward evil and possibly, and be willing to not be able to walk yourself back, right? And she had already envisioned herself doing that. And that's the type of folks we need in the business. And then we have to train them. And then we have to equip them. You know, I talked to he's a detective now, but he was behind stage when Jason Aldean stepped on stage. And when he heard the gunfire, he looked at his partner, and they were convinced that there was a team of gunmen on the stage. That's how loud it was, and that's how close it was in the screams, and how visceral it was for them. And that was
that microphone effect. That really fueled a lot of the conspiracy theorists.
That's right.
Because the microphone picked it up, amplified it to the speakers, and then it echoed, and so it made it sound like there were multiple shooters at multiple locations.
That's an excellent point. Well, he looks at his Glock 22.
Yeah.
You know, and okay, well, I'm going to go confront them with this, you know, and, you know, part of that is being prepared. If this unfortunately is what we're looking at dealing with, you know, the officers have to be equipped to handle this, to be able to face someone with an assault rifle. Mm-hmm. You don't bring a handgun to that fight. You know, so the preparation, the equipment, all of this specialty training is a huge part of it.
And speaking of taking care of people, I do want to talk a little bit about the aftermath. I know, speaking of the entire community being engaged on this, that everyone had to heal. The country had to heal over this. I mean, I grew up in Southern California, and I had a friend from my childhood who was one of the shooting victims, and she was just at the concert. I mean, this touched, I think, everybody. But from your guys' perspective, how did you guys handle, was there any kind of critical incident debrief? I mean, how do you care for that many people? What are your thoughts on the aftermath of this attack?
I think at the level of what we dealt with here, it was very difficult to bring everybody to a single location and debrief it. So I think a lot of the debriefing came in the days and in the weeks afterwards. You have to understand that in the days after this, so my team worked in, obviously, you know, a full shift, and then well into the night, into the morning, and then had to come back the next day. And we were on basically at Metro, we have a roster where you're on 12 on, 12 off, like all days off canceled, for something as critical as this, because we wanted to make sure there wasn't any other threats to the values. And they basically stuck us in front of every casino had a strike team in front of it. And so it was for us, you know, and I don't know what happened in the SWAT world or in I really stress the investigators who had to go in, and the FBI response team, the Metro, the evidence people, homicide, force investigation team, counter-terrorism detectives, who now had to go put sense to this senseless act. You know, their trauma will be different.
Yeah.
I got to stand in front of a casino with my kids, you know, my team, my young kids. And, you know, Metro was very young. I had 5-year cops training, you know, 8-month cops. It's like babies training toddlers, but, you know, great kids. And we're standing out, and the public is walking up and down the strip, and it's just every single person is like giving hugs, and people are bringing us up. One lady brings us these steak sandwiches from a very expensive restaurant. And we just ate, you know, we just had breakfast burritos, and it's like, I didn't want this food to go to waste. You know, I like to eat. People bringing us, just coming up, and to the cops listening to this podcast, America loves you. You know, the vast majority of people love you. You know, even the ones who get frustrated, you know, working in prison reentry, I got guys who do 25, 30 years in prison. After our law enforcement session, they're coming up with tears in their eyes, hugging cops. They never thought they'd do this. They have a relationship now. And so, you know, the public supports you. They love you. They want to see you succeed. It's kind of pushing the executives and the you know, the elected folks who pull the purse strings. Get these cops the equipment. I'm a big believer in, you got to train cops. You got to retain cops. You have to take care of them. We're not taking any more off the plate for American law enforcement. We're a 911 nation. Anything blips your radar, call 911. I don't know if we need to get away from that to a degree, but you won't now, you know, here in Nevada, now you got to do 33 years before you can draw a pension. You know, that's a long time to do this job, especially when you continue to task and add. So you have to give them something. I think we're going to see regional training facilities. I think we're going to see regional wellness facilities for first responders, not just police, but fire,
That's right.
trauma docs, nurses. Who's working harder that night than some of the nurses? and some of our emergency trauma surgeons. And so I see these guys who go through all this, we do all this great training. I think we really need to start looking equally as much as, hey, it's our training day. We get 2 training days a month. And instead of hitting the streets, we're going to go do yoga. I know it sounds kind of cheesy, but have you done it? Have you done a session? Have you done stretching? Like, I can barely stand up today because my back's out. That's not because of, that's from a 23-year career of wearing a gun in the small of my back when I was working, plain clothes undercover down on the strip. So the body's, when you're 21, 22, you think, oh, nothing's going to faze me. Nothing's going to take me down. But I promise you, as you get into your 30s and your 40s and you start to progress through the career,
adds up.
There's chinks in this armor, and it's normal. I wouldn't trade my career for anything, even all the trauma.
Yeah.
It is who we are. We chose this. We men and women of law enforcement chose this warrior profession because we are here to serve our fellow man. Nothing more noble, but bosses and communities have to spend the money to go, we're gonna give them we're gonna build a gym, and it's just for the law enforcement first responder community. We're gonna have jujitsu. How many cops are now training jujitsu? They should be, because it makes you a safer police officer, and it lowers that deadly force, that lawful but awful deadly force contact. So I could talk for hours about what we need to do for our police officers in this country. My dream, right? My dream is 100-year-old cops drawing a pension. That's my, we talk about our visions, and like, what do you want to see? That's my dream. I want to see police officers living great lives, get into retirement, and living to 100, taking out 3 times more than they put into the system.
Yeah, the wellness thing is such a thing because, like we said, you have to have those outlets. You have to have somewhere to put this stuff. Yeah. And for some people, that's meditation, yoga, jujitsu. Yeah. But for some people, it's a lot more to process. And it's a whole, like you said, it's a whole healthcare. Mental health care is a big deal on the wellness perspective. Will, what do you think? What are your thoughts on the aftermath and wellness for this?
We were fortunate, we had an infrastructure within our agency that's our police employee assistance program that was started up a generation before Ashton and I even joined the agency. And it became clear that even that wasn't sufficient to deal with the weight of this, right? Because many people, and to include myself, feel like we never left that shift. We're still there. And I think we're also taught to feel that that's wrong, right? And only because I'm okay saying this, my therapist has said it's okay to leave yourself in those places because you love what you do, you love the people you serve. When you're in relationships, you leave a part of yourself there, and you spent yourself in a worthy cause that evening, and you left a part of yourself there, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, and I say that, and also I'm guilty of it. Again, I said that I've sat across from Ash and broke bread many times, and I've never heard his account of that evening. And we were both there serving different roles. And so, we don't do a good enough job. I sit here knowing that I don't know if there's a fix, because, when you sign up to be a servant warrior and you want to get in the mix and you show up, you see the worst of things. I remember being a new police officer and I had a newborn baby and I went to a SIDS call, right? And that's how I started my career. And I went home and my daughter, I looked at her in her crib and she's the same age as the baby that I was just looking at in her crib. And how come I get to enjoy my daughter and those parents don't? Never, and I didn't have to talk about it with my wife. How was work? It was good.
Yeah, you don't want to hear. You don't. Yeah, that's a tough one.
Well, here's the other thing too: is now we're trying to recruit officers to a profession. In the body cam era, there's no secrets,
right?
How was work? I heard you were at that crazy event. Your spouses, your significant others, your loved ones, they don't need to hear about it at all. They can watch it. Yeah. They can watch the body camera footage, and they're like,
and it'll be in their face,
and they're like, you went through that. So here's the other thing too: is our loved ones. The night that I ran out of the house in my jeans and t-shirt, I didn't even put on my sexy SWAT outfit, right? I ran my jeans and t-shirt that night of the shooting, the concert. I grabbed my pack set to listen to what was going on. And I had And there was radio silence. So I got on my phone to try to call dispatch, and I walked into my closet to grab what I needed. And I had another pack set radio charging in my closet, and I turned that one on. I ran out and I left, and the radio was on. My wife heard the whole thing. She heard all of it.
Mm.
And when I got home that morning, she had lived through it, and I realized, and so I thought about that. She just experienced that. She experiences everything I experience. And then the dispatchers. So she basically, without working, got a glimpse into the life of a dispatcher that night, who has to hear all this traumatic stuff, zero closure.
Yeah.
They never get to hear how these things wrap up if everything's okay. They just have to go home and sort of reel, on what they dealt with that shift. And they just took a bunch of jabs to the face, and they have to go home and be okay. And I just don't know that because we're, inherently flawed and selfish and can be very evil. I don't know that there's any amount of therapy that can fix what you see and what you experience. You really just have to have healthy outlets, healthy coping mechanisms, a healthy perspective on, you're feeling terribly about this. That's completely normal. You also don't have to hide it from anyone. It's okay to cry about it.
Yeah.
I mean, the very first time I gave a 1 October debrief was in the Blue Mountains in Canada. I had said no to the first 7 requests because I was way too messy over it.
Yep.
And I sat there. That wasn't the first one. The first one was at the Heartland Tactical Officer Association. There were 600 SWAT personnel in the room. And I wept on that stage. The moment I talked about how Levi told me he had to go, and I need you to go, I wept. Like, crying is not a good adjective. So, we just have to.
It's okay to be vulnerable, in certain environments for law enforcement. And I think we need to know that.
Well, you learn that throughout your career,
Yeah.
that you're very vulnerable,
Yeah.
and we walk every shift as if we can't be, but you're not going to do a good job as a public servant if you don't show vulnerability.
Yes.
Our crisis negotiators are great because
Yes.
they're able to do that, and they're able to be
100%.
themselves. And that's why oftentimes negotiators will like to go in the corner, curl up in a ball, and talk on the phone to the person that's barricaded, because they don't want to be judged by their peers by the things they're going to
Yes.
say.
Right.
Because they're really being their true selves, their
Yes.
vulnerable selves, so they can make a connection. And
And
that's what makes you really, really experience this career,
Yes.
this calling, is when you open yourself up to, I'm going to have a relationship with this person.
Mhm.
And it's just important to me if this person from the community shows up at my retirement party as my old supervisor, right? And because I want them to come to my aid when I'm in their neighborhood.
Yeah.
I want them to grab my radio and say, hey, Will Huddler needs help, right? And, that's just not what's proliferated.
Yeah, it's just tough, show no weakness facade. I think it's part of the problem in the community relations world of law enforcement in the communities, where we need to bridge that gap and maybe vulnerability. I'm not saying you show vulnerability on a tactical situation or public safety threat, but I'll tell you right now, I had the best, it could be anything from a traffic stop, person stop, or just a house call, a domestic or anything. And
Mm-hmm.
you sit there and show that empathetic listener. And what do the negotiators do? They don't talk, they listen.
Well, listen, the military gets it right. Not always, essentially. But in the 80s, they started with and maybe before that, with a very critical debrief process at training. And that worked its way into the tactical world. And one thing I loved about the SWAT culture was we had a down and dirty debrief where it was like, a functional family puts it all out on the table.
No holds barred.
That's right. And
You screwed up.
Why
Close
did
the
you
door.
do that? We
Yeah.
almost didn't go home because you screwed that up.
Yep.
And you lay it all out on the line. It's dealt with there. You hug, you tell each other you love each other afterwards. It's over. You train to fix it. But
And we've had managers that went to that first one, and when we checked that rank at the door, they couldn't do it.
sure.
And that's the problem.
And so in leadership,
Right. Now, notice I say manager,
that's right.
not leader.
That's right. And I believe that the chicken comes before the egg in leadership. That, as a leader, I have to demonstrate the vulnerability. So I have to, in the debrief, grab the samurai sword and plunge it in my heart and say, I failed you guys right here. And I'm going to do everything I can to make sure I don't do that again. And I left you exposed. And then your troops will realize, wow, it's okay. It's okay to own it in front of these folks. This is safe.
Yeah.
Right. But it has to start with the leader, because, debrief, post-shift debrief has not become a debrief. It's become something else now. It's become like a fantasy football roster hangout session, and, a little bit of a sort of de-stress session, but for the most part, no. And I think we can really seize the moment in police leadership and say, okay, Cheryl, you were on that call. Let's talk about it. How'd that go? Right. And then as a supervisor, because you have two hats, you got your manager hat and your leader hat, right? You'll be able to assess some performance. You'll also be able to see what they're dealing with, right? I mean, if your cop went on a DV that was violent and they had a close call, if they break down in tears, maybe they're dealing with a lot more than just that call. Oh. And then you need to know those things. And then so that when the really bad day hits, they've already learned some coping mechanisms.
Right.
And I just don't think that's so prolific in the police culture. I don't.
Yeah.
I think it's getting better. There's a lot of programs that seem to be, and departments that seem to be building out some of that. The problem is, and it's all we can do is try to seize the moment, like you said, and do what we can. But the problem is for me was I didn't start to learn those coping skills until 5-10 years in, when a lot of damage is already done.
Yeah.
So it has to start early, and it's hard when, you have your young guys that are 21, 22 years old on an apartment, and they're just, they just want to run around with their hair on fire, which is great. It's hard to slow them down and to do this other stuff. But at the same time, the stuff that we are getting tasked with is all the other bureaucratic stuff, right? And so it's distracting.
It's the checkbox leadership.
Yeah, it's distracting.
And that's when, okay, so you talked about policy versus culture. There's a million programs. Doesn't mean they're part of culture, right? Because when the person who started the program leaves, the life of the program's gone. And in that hair on fire phase of our career, that's when the cops have to be grabbed by the nape of the neck, told that they're loved, and reminded that this is not their identity. They can't allow this profession to become an idol in their lives.
Yes.
Because
thou shalt have no other gods but me.
And I'm going to tell you, idols, they'll break your heart, man.
Mm-hmm.
And police work, if you only identify with your profession, it'll break your heart. You take a look at in 2008 when you had the economic downturn and all of these really elite financial institution leaders were taking their own lives because they're like, I can no longer live the way that I'm not this person anymore at the club or driving this car and living in this house. Mm-hmm. And it happens in every profession, but it happens in police work too. And, when you see someone who's tactically sound, maybe one of the most tactical and best officer safety, threat perception, jackets that I've ever worked with was Alan Beck.
Yeah.
And,
we were academy mates together.
Yeah. And they got a drop on Alan.
He beat me in in 2 seconds, had me pinned and wrapped up. And that's what kind of was part of my broken armor, was that if you can take Alan, you could take me any day of the week.
Same. I had that moment of reflection, like it could have been any of us if it could be him.
And then making the mistake of watching the video from the incident, the surveillance that should have never.
And it's tough to get away from that now in the information age.
And that's what put me in therapy.
Sure.
Because I never suicidal, but just like consumed with the death and that video playing on a constant loop in my head.
I'll tell you what, I mean, if there's anything that we can do here as a podcast or as the group of guys that are having this conversation at this table, I can tell you that because I too regularly see a therapist. All three of us with law enforcement backgrounds are openly telling anyone listening to this that here we are in therapy dealing with our shit, right? Mm-hmm. That is part of the process. And so get on board with it and don't be ashamed. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no stigma there. There's no reason you have to be embarrassed or shy about needing a professional's help to process through some stuff. Because if you don't do it early, it's going to take a toll later on.
A young lady who's she's actually my age, but she got into law enforcement late. She's a state parole and probation officer who mentors and works within our organization now at Hope for Prisoners. Her name's Tiffany. She's fantastic. She's an amazing person. She has a quote when she comes in and talks. She says, the trauma isn't your fault. The healing is 100% your responsibility. It's not my fault that this guy did what he did and that 58 people lost their lives. It's not my fault. But the after effects of that and how I compartmentalize that trauma, it's not my fault. Alan, his energy is now with the universe. It's not my fault, but I have to deal with the trauma. It's my responsibility because I have a family. I have a community that I still serve. I have friends. I have a life, and it is your responsibility to put that trauma in that. You can compartmentalize it. I was diagnosed PTSD. I don't call it D. I call it I. It's an injury. You can heal from an injury. You break your arm, the arm fixes it. It heals back stronger than before. Therapy is important. And I really encourage all the cops listening, please, even if you're year 2, 3, or 4, you change your oil in your car.
You just learn stuff about yourself that you didn't understand.
You go in for 30 minutes, 40 minutes. How are you feeling today? I feel great. Good. See you in a couple of weeks. We'll see you in a month. Come, just maintenance.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. You spoke to the healing is your responsibility. And there's a program that my agency is working with now, the Struggle Well, Boulder Crest Foundation, I think is the name of it. I haven't gone through it yet, but a bunch of people that I work with have. And there's a book that they recommend. It's called Struggle Well, and it talks about, dealing with trauma and incidents like that as an opportunity, an opportunity for growth, and really like kind of embracing exactly what you said, which is, this thing happened, but it already happened. Right. And so now all I can do is respond to that. And so if you see that as an opportunity for growth, then, and you can like really capture that, then
I can go home and drink and feel bad for myself and go down a rabbit hole of addiction and problems. It's going to cost me my career, my loved ones, my family, or I can just deal with it. We deal with so much. Why can't we deal with this too?
And, I realized that I had a selfish approach, that it was on my watch. It was on my watch, right? And then, you read some random article criticizing your decisions, right? And then I ran into a community member. I had a RV, recreational vehicle. And because I was obsessed post 1 October with my job, and I would go in at 7 a.m. and come home at 1 a.m., I sold it. And so I got a call from a guy, and he wanted to come take a look at it. So I met him, and he's kicking the tires on it. And I'm like, why are you in the market? He asked me why I was selling it. And I said, why are you buying it? Because I didn't want to tell him why I was selling it. Yeah. Because I had bought it for my family, and we had all these big plans, and now I was putting my job over my family. That's the truth. And he said, well, I was at the concert. I was in the Marine Corps, and I know what gunfire sounds like, automatic gunfire sounds like. And I was right in front of the stage, and I grabbed my wife. She was covered in blood, and we just ran east. I ran her as fast as we could, and I started just tearing off her clothes, trying to find the wound so I could apply pressure. And I looked at her face, and she was talking. She was coherent. I was like, okay. And she says, it's not coming from me. And so he lifts up his shirt, and he took a .223 round through his right side, exited his left side, hit nothing vital. He spent time in the hospital, recovered physically, right? And again, I'm like, my lips quivering as I'm listening to the story, and I shook his hand, and I said, well, this is why I'm selling it, right? But when I drove home after that, after meeting him, I won't say his name out of respect, but I realized that this is not just my burden. There's so many people who are carrying this thing too, and it's not just mine. It's not just my failure. My decisions are certainly my responsibility and my fault, right? But it wasn't just mine to carry.
Yeah,
other people own this too. Other people were impacted by this too.
Yeah, there's a collective.
And listen, he said he was buying the RV because it was on his bucket list to drive the country with his wife, and he wasn't going to miss out on the chance of doing it again. He wasn't going to say, we'll do it next year.
Yeah. Because it might not be here.
Yeah. And, I feel like he was sent to me divinely because I needed it at that moment, for sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The universe will send people your way for sure. It'll send you a sign. It'll send you whatever you call it.
Yeah. That's crazy. That's quite a story, guys. And I appreciate your time and sharing with us, because there's a lot to unpack in this, for real. And I know we're only scratching the surface, but
we actually owe you for a therapy session. Who do we make who should we Venmo?
Well,
we thank Brink's partnership here at Tactical Tangents. So,
and I'll just say and I'll just say, anyone listening, I don't know if we'll give out our contact information here at the end, but I continue to mentor police officers in my retirement.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those things I find incredibly it helps kind of heal me, self-healing, because I think as cops, we're really good to fix problems, and sometimes we fail to fix the ones that we're staring right in the mirror when we wake up in the morning. So any officer out there who needs anything, on my end, you can reach out, Google search my name, you'll find me.
Whatever info you want to give, you're welcome to.
Sure. My email, I have my own company. I have a private investigator's license here, 2023, knock on wood. I got the process moving, and I already have my own company kind of formed for my own world. And so my email is through my company, Vanguard Intelligence Group. It's Ashton, ASHTON, @vanguardvegas.com. I'm on all the social media. If you go on Twitter, I'm at Ashton Pack, and then on the infamous IG, Ashton_Pack.
On the grams.
Yeah.
With his stunning good looks.
You got to market yourself. It's so silly, but we have to do it.
On that note, that's, my partnership with this company has been therapeutic. And I know that the CEO might be listening. I'm definitely interested in the success of the company.
Sure.
But myself and the folks that I recruited to this team, we get to go out and meet with different police departments all over the world now. And I call them meetings. I don't call them product demos, because we're not trying to sell anything. We know their problem set. We say, here's a solution. But let me tell you why this company started. And I get to talk about this. And now I can sit in front of you guys and actually talk about it without going through an entire box of Kleenex. And, that for me has put me in a position to answer a ton of questions all over the country, pass on lessons learned, pass on, don't repeat my mistakes, talk to the SWAT commanders to say, do not let this job consume your life. And that happens half the time. I was in Northern California yesterday meeting with folks up there, and we were talking about that. And it doesn't matter what town you're in, same problems, same struggles, political bullets, real bullets, all of that, emotional bullets, they're dodging all of them. And, it's really been good for me in terms of just sort of healing from 2 decades, for sure.
When you spoke to the people that you've recruited as well to come work at Brink, and right off the bat, when we met you guys, that was one of the things that stood out right away. We're big on people, ideas, hardware in that order,
mm-hmm.
and having the right people really takes places.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing on a SWAT team. It's not all the gear and the gadgets. It's the guys and gals that you put behind that stuff that really make the difference. And Brink has done a really cool job of building a team that is turning the needle. It's not just humming along. It's not, no pun intended. We're talking about a drone or whatever, but you guys, I really think you're going to turn the needle with the innovation and the stuff that you're doing. What kind of stuff is on the horizon for Brink? Where is it going, and what's the future of public safety technology look like with Brink in the picture?
I can tell you the ceiling's high, but it starts off with a worldview, and the reason why Blake and I connected early on, and we get along is because, he's very inquisitive, and he wants to understand the best way to do this job. And then based on that, help figure out, identify gaps and help figure out solutions through tech that can help us pick up those gaps without taking the human piece out of it. I mean, we were on an airplane flying, I don't know, to the East Coast. This was like 2 years ago or something. And, he asked me to walk him through some sort of tactical decisions. And one of those scripts I was giving him, included me when I brief the team, when they show up. I brief the team, like I'm at the talk now, I'm getting intel from the investigators or from the negotiators, right? The team is pulling up and it's like, okay, this is what we got, right? And I would always say the person's name. I would always say their name. And he asked me, why would you do that? And when I say the person, it's whoever's in the box, whether it's a car, a vehicle barricade, or a house, or an apartment, or in the middle of a field, right? I would say, this is John, just hypothetical. John's having a bad day, right? We have John's daughter. She's with negotiators now. We're working on getting intel so that we can talk. And I wanted to make it very clear to everyone on there that this is a human being who is having a rough go. And maybe they've done something heinous. Maybe they haven't, and they believe they have, but they need to be humanized to the whole team.
They were once a baby that they took a wrong path.
Yeah.
That's how I look at it now.
Yeah. And it could just be that day, right? And oftentimes, a lot of our barricades would be like domestic violence related. So there's times where there's no criminal record at all. It's just a lot of rage and emotion, right? That led to something horrible happening. And now the SWAT team's there. And as the team is in their haste to check all the boxes and set up their containment and grab their gear and get ready to deploy their specialty associated with the mission, I want to remind them that all of that's cool, but we have to begin with the end in mind. And the end in mind here is we get a voluntary surrender, no additional injuries. And by the way, the SWAT team, you're here so the negotiators can do their job safely. The moment we need a tactical intervention, you're going to be ready for that too. But we're going to try to have this person enter the mental health system, the criminal justice system, under their own accord. That's the goal. And that's what a win looks like. And, he was so curious, and that resonated with Blake, and again, I said Blake Resnick, and that's Brink, right? Blake Resnick Incorporated. And now he's 22-year-old man, right? And he's running this company that has 100 employees, and he built our 2 drones in his garage, right? And it's impressive. In his mom's cool dining room, and we have, just under 20 police, fire, military professionals in the company. And why are they all following a 22-year-old kid? Why? It's because we have a visceral connection to the mission and what he envisions for us is that he's going to add value to everything we do with technology. So when you ask, what's on the horizon, it's really like, it's like the opposite. Okay, what aren't we going to get?
Defining what the horizon is.
Define the horizon. And also, we talk about these mass casualty incidents. How can drone technology help in those? When you're clearing a confined space, how can drone technology help there? What is the most valuable tool that a SWAT team has? And Blake didn't know this, but now he does. Now he knows that if you maintain two-way communication with someone, even who's homicidal, you're like in the high 90th percentile, that they're going to surrender voluntarily because they'll humanize you. You'll humanize them. Emotion starts to decrease. Rationality starts to increase.
Yep.
And so he built us a flying cell phone, right? And it's saving lives. I mean, somewhere in America today, the technology that he designed and that this company's building, that an American is building in the room next to us, and the engineer is conceiving up in Seattle at that office, and that Kevin's training folks on, it's going to save someone's life. I mean, we saw it just 3 weeks ago. We had a Southern California team here. I really want to brag on them, but they were here. They went through our 3-day school that you just attended. And then they went back home. And then a sister department called on them for help. You talked about this. Sister agency calls on them for help. And they're flying the drone to clear a casino after an armored car was robbed, right? And they're helping and this is 5 days removed from their training. So this is why we're all part of this company. So, to answer your question, great things, and not great because they're going to be cool or technologically advanced, but they're going to be great because someone is going to go home because of the technology.
Yeah, the first interactions I've had with pretty much every Brink employee, and it definitely seems on purpose and by design. Is any conversation that I've had with them, it's always the mission is to save lives, like leverage technology to save lives. Some variation of that, but save lives was always a clear part of it, and it speaks really to the culture of the team, which is cool.
I have no relation to Brink outside of just knowing some of the employees here and Will, and I appreciate the invite here. But honestly, it looks like you can see what something very amazing is happening here. And on the night in question, but on so many nights, I remember thinking to myself, man, it would be so cool if I could do this with utilize that technology effectively. And now to know that we have a drone, that you guys have a drone that can fly indoors and break windows and then communicate with people to save the lives of the people in crisis. Because I promise you, like 99% of the people in crisis, they're not the evil, green-skinned, sulfur emitting that you think they are from the movies.
Yeah.
It's the teacher who is like 2 weeks off of her psychotropic meds, completely down the rabbit hole of bipolar or paranoid schizophrenia. The husband calls 911 because he doesn't know what else to do. And 20 years ago, I remember it was a young cop walks in by himself. She comes out with a knife and he killed her. That's not what we want to do in law enforcement.
Yeah.
And a drone can now fly in and convince her to come outside because she's got kids and she's got kids at school that she's teaching. And she's a member of our community that we need to get help for. That's amazing.
Yeah, I agree. And it, like I said, it's every employee at Brink that I have interacted with seems to understand that.
Yeah.
Even the guys without the law enforcement background, just the tech side of it. So, anything cool you guys are working on that you're able to share or talk about as far as directions you're headed or anything like that?
Yeah. So we're launching here pretty quick. We're launching our Brink ball. And
got to see that at SHOT Show. I think we've got some video we could probably roll into here a little bit.
Well, so here's the thing, right? Is there's not a lot of money in public safety. And when you're developing technology for public safety, it's usually, if you see an agency that's advanced, they usually have a patchwork of tech that they're trying to integrate, their own way, because they hired a couple of cops that have an IT background or whatever, and they're good at that type of stuff, and they're trying to figure it out. Well, we don't, historically in public safety, we haven't had the world's most talented engineers building us stuff because there's just not a lot of money here. We don't pay fast.
Yeah.
You order something. I ordered new radios, new comms, new headsets, and that for the team here. It took us 14 months to get them. Right.
I've been there.
Yeah. They were obsolete by the time we got them. Right. And so it's just not something that these big companies are chasing down. But we're committed to it. Right. And so, some of the talent that we have up here in Vegas from our builders, some of these guys are like self-taught engineers, to some of the folks that are on the team up in Seattle, to include our CEO. But some of the folks on team in Seattle have done amazing things, like they were involved in, lunar landings, those algorithms and, amazing automation. I can't have a 4-minute conversation with them, but those are the type of people that are building us things now. And so, for example, they saw these phones that we would use for crisis negotiation. And it's like an old 80s telephone. It's in a Pelican case, not to knock it because we've used them for years. Sometimes we strap it to a carpet dolly and we roll it down the hallway, and we have to make entry to do that. We have to shield in, and that could incite an ambush right there. And now you're in a gunfight, and we got to do that to get
you
close.
Instigated on someone's narrative.
Someone's narrative is going to be, why'd you even go? Well, we're trying to talk. We don't have any other way to do it, right? And then, and then the Pelican case is there, and then we're on the PA saying, hey, buddy, we're here to help you. Open the Pelican case. We promise nothing in there is going to hurt you, right? And so what happens? It's thrown out the second floor window, right? And they're like, okay, there goes that.
This whole thing playing out.
Yeah, there goes that. So he's like, I think I can build you guys something pretty robust that you could throw in. It won't be able to hang up. How about that? So, I watched them drop this ball like 23 times off of the building in Seattle, and it was still fine. It's essentially a cell phone module that also gives you a bunch of other features, location, all of these things as you're communicating two-way with someone, and they can hear you clearly. You can hear them as if they're standing right next to it. It's too big to flush down a toilet. It's water resistant, all of these things. And that's just something to the engineers are like, wow, this is so simple. they designed it in like 60 days, right? They're like, this is so simple. How come you guys don't have this? And like, we're thinking the same thing, because we would have, listen, we've done this. We've cored out a Nerf football and thrown a listening device in there and tried to throw that in. And SWAT guys, they got their kit on. Number one, their lats are too big to throw anyway. And they're trying to throw with their kit on after they ported a hole, right? And now we're trying to listen in the listening device and talk through the LRAD, on the Bearcat, and you're having this weird conversation that's not efficient at all. And so this Brink ball, it's something so simple, but it's going to solve so many problems. And the exciting thing for me and for the rest of our company and the team is that it's not just for SWAT. Like a supervisor can have this thing. It's so cheap. Throw phones, rescue phones, or whatever. There's a lot of good companies that have been doing this and helping save lives for a long time. But we're talking, tens of thousands of dollars or close to it. Not this product, right? It's going to be extremely cheap, extremely affordable, and accessible, because that's the other thing he understands. So he listened, and I was like, dude, my boss is 22, so I can say dude. He would never call the sheriff that. But anyway, actually, he doesn't mind. Anyway,
Probably not.
If you would just price it at this price point, I know it's going to cut margins, but then a lieutenant can purchase it with going
a credit card.
to the powers that be
Yes.
to move a mountain. If you
Yes.
just change the price $5.
Hard money versus soft money.
Yeah,
in government.
and he listens.
Yeah.
And so he did it. So the drone is priced where a lieutenant, at least in this city, can purchase it. And the Brink ball is priced a lot less, right? And that all that stuff will be rolled out. But a simple solution like that a patrol supervisor can respond before SWAT's even called out, before the county even spends $8,000 an hour to roll out the SWAT team, they can roll this ball into the backyard for the open field barricade, and they can have a two-way conversation with whoever's in crisis and say, listen, man, we're here to help you. Maybe what they've done isn't that bad, but they could never get close enough to even talk to them. Right. And now they can't hang up. They can throw it back, but guess what? If they throw it back, you know where they are. You know their hands work. You know they're mobile. It's all situational awareness, right? So, that's just one small thing that we're rolling out as we move forward here.
I'm going to buy one for my kids' room.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And I know firsthand talking with you guys that the lemur, the drone is called the lemur, and that's just the first thing. It's not the last thing.
Oh,
You guys
even
are doing
that,
all kinds of stuff.
Our first lemur was like a racing drone. It was fully manual. You really had to be a drone pilot to fly it. And now, this old bald retired lieutenant can whip the thing around my house and fly, because they've incorporated LiDAR technology, so it'll hold itself. Even that, we're working to increase the effectiveness in terms of pilot cognitive load, right? Like, we want it so that anyone can pick it up and use it with just some basic training.
Yeah, it's.
You got to fly this week.
Yeah, and it's not as hard as you think at first.
Mm-hmm.
So you come into it and you start flying the drones, and it is a very the cognitive load thing is real. It takes full focus.
Mm-hmm.
But once you start getting the hang of it and you build a little bit of that, unconscious competence, just a little bit. It doesn't take a lot, but once you get over that hump, it's really not that bad.
And it's okay that it takes a little bit.
Yeah.
Because any tool that we have that's worth its weight takes time to build skills and to maintain.
Yeah.
Anything we have, whether it's verbal, whether it's on our belts.
Yep.
If we're good at it, it takes practice.
Absolutely.
And you want to be effective in the moment. But it's certainly been effective, and we've had a lot of success with teams adopting it right away and putting it out in the field.
And look, even we talk about the piloting side of it and learning how to fly, some fine motor skills and stuff, but the training is not. It doesn't stop at that, right? Like the whole last day, you're also getting practice flying it and getting better as you go, but you're also learning how to work all the accessories, how to break glass with it, how to drop stuff with a payload feature, how to fly in the dark. There's all kinds of stuff that you're building on in that course. So not only is the drone really cool, and we've been using it at my agency, my day job, and it's been going great. But the training course specifically is also, I think, worth the time for anyone that's looking at
Thanks for saying that.
at integrating this thing into their team. So, and we're happy to give info. If you guys reach out to us, we can share stories and testimonial or whatever you guys need. So, anything else on 1 October? Any big picture messages or lessons or ideas that first responder types should take?
I think just, mindset is so critical, making sure you're prepared mentally, and then making sure, you have the equipment. That's a big deal. And I know it's easier said than done for some police organizations, smaller ones that don't have the budget to go buy, the best equipment. So,
yeah. Well,
I mean, this is a bit granular, right? But I don't know if I got to touch on this, is that, because we are the way we are in this country and we're sort of grab the bull by the horns. And for the most part, a couple of lessons we learned there are, when you're putting together your strike teams, your RTFs, just assign one person to the radio. That's okay. When you're looking to triage folks, you don't need to broadcast that. Like, we know that there's someone in front of you that needs help them. And also, originally the plan was always to have a lot of medical assets show up at the epicenter of the incident. And we realized that we need a good amount of medical surgeons. We need all those trained hands to go to the trauma centers, to go to the ERs, so people can get into surgery right away, because there's only so much you can do in the field. That.
Yeah.
So, these are some of the takeaways that I would just say, take a look at what your processes are. And for us, our expectations weren't realistic. The expectation that someone would hand us a bag with all the hotel keys. So what did I have my team doing? I had my team learning how to commandeer elevator cars on the Strip, right? Learning how to control those things and getting us the keys. And then also finding out, hey, there isn't one public safety master key for every elevator in the valley. That's a problem, right? And that is a legislative issue.
Yeah.
And so all of these things, all this groundwork needs to be laid, and the leaders of the agencies have to get it done. They have to get it done.
And frontline supervisors will know exactly what I'm talking about. But on every team, you have the weakest officer. Not necessarily a bad person, just they're the weakest officer. You can utilize them. My point is this: send someone to the surveillance room. Put a cop in a surveillance room who can watch the cameras in real time, because security in this, first of all, some security will abandon their post. They're getting paid $10 an hour and they're not putting their life on the line for a property, But even like when we had our incident where Igor and Alan were shot, a cop ran to the surveillance room and sat there with the security guard and was able to relay to the cops, they are in the northwest corner. They are tucked down behind the oil. That, you, officer so-and-so, stop. You're about to walk into their line of fire. I don't care what it is. It can be, an armed robbery in progress at the Walmart, a hostage situation in a large supermarket or in a Target. Put someone in the surveillance room. And if you don't know where the surveillance room is, this is where you send your cops on, hey, this morning, I want you to go down to the Target and talk to the manager and find out where the surveillance room is, and then report back tomorrow at briefing on where you go, how you get there, and who your contact is.
In terms of like a philosophical statement, Ash mentioned it earlier that, that there are people in the country that love you for doing this job. And for any first responders that are listening, never forget the fact that you're exceptional for choosing to get into this, to follow whatever called you into it. And the job is harder now, I believe, than it's ever been. But every generation has been able to say that.
That's right.
So every generation has been able to say it's harder now than it was before. And every generation has stepped up and done things to improve the profession, to do a better job. Because, you begin with the end in mind. The goal is how do you measure police efficacy? Public trust. How do you measure public trust for the police executives on the line? Just, take a look at evidence-based policing. Is your community, are they calling the police? If they call you, they trust you to do your job. If they're not calling you, you have big problems. The safest communities in America call the police all the time. They report the smallest things and they expect them to be followed up on, right? So what are you doing on a daily basis to improve the trust the community has in you as a leader of a public agency, as a servant within that public agency? And don't forget, that how valuable your life is, because if that's true, then all the other lives around you are also valuable and worth the effort. Yes. And it's still such a sacred profession, and you have such an opportunity to make an impact on just one person. And I was reminded of that recently, and it's, whether you have a bunch of brass or metal hanging on your uniform or not, there's going to be someone one day that is grateful that you chose to put on a uniform. So what you do, you're spending yourself, you're in the arena, right? You're spending yourself in a worthy cause. It's not the critic the critic's life still matters, because the critic's going to need you one day too. Mm-hmm. They're going to call for help, and you're going to look them in the eye, and you're going to show them so much grace that you're going to give them a change of heart. They're going to be like, holy crap, I was wrong about these guys. And those are your opportunities to deal with the critic, not on their terms, on your terms, when it's hitting the fan, when it's a bad day. And, I can say this, that if you grind and you toil and you serve people and you love the people next to you and you want to see them succeed, strangely, when you want to see the people next to you succeed, you start promoting. It's weird, because they start doing well and they're on your team, and you're perceived as being a good leader, right? And all of those things will fall into place for you if you continue to remember why you got into this thing in the first place, and it's worth it. So stick it out.
Cops will attack the gates of hell with a squirt gun if you lead them there. They really will.
That is true. I can't thank you guys both enough for the time and for sharing the stories. I know some of these stories are hard to tell, and the memories are hard to revisit on some scale. Not on this scale, perhaps, but on some scale, I can relate. Mm-hmm. So I really appreciate you guys opening up and taking the time to sit with us and share with our audience, which I think is going to benefit a lot of people. So
pleasure's ours, brother.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. Well, I think that's all we got. Make sure you check out the podcast episodes that we put out on the 1st and the 15th. You can find us on social media. We're at Tac Tangents, and obviously our website, tacticaltangents.com.